Recording in progress.
So, good evening, everyone. We are in the Zoning and Planning Committee meeting with almost all of our members in the room and almost all of our staff in the room. And that's something. So tonight is March 13th, Monday night, regularly scheduled meeting. I'm Deb Crossley, Chair of the committee and Councilor at Large from Ward 5. I am joined at the start of the meeting to my right with Allison Leary at large from Ward 1, President Susan Albright at large from Ward 2, and to my left, I'll go from the other end because I know our Vice Chair is coming back into the room any second now. Josh Krinsman, Councilor at Large from Ward 4, Pam Wright at Large from Ward 3, and Holly Ryan, Ward Councilor from Ward 8. And I will introduce her in absentia. We are also joined imminently by our Vice Chair, Vicki Danberg at Large from Ward 6. And our committee clerk, as always, is Jacqueline Norton. We are also joined by Director of the Planning Department, Barney Heath, Associate Director, Jen Kyra, and Senior Planner, your title's longer and I can never remember all of it, Zachary Lamel. And it's so nice to see you in person after all this time. I missed seeing you last meeting. So I believe we're also joined by members of the Planning and Development Board. Is Mr. Kerry Brown with us? Would you like to introduce your members this evening? No. Kelly Brown's not here.
I see Peter.
I see Peter Doringer.
Yeah.
Mr. Doringer, are you joined by others of your colleagues?
You know, I just got in, so I'm looking too. There's an Amy that may be one of ours, but I'm not seeing anyone else yet.
We are not voting on anything. We're not planning to be voting on anything that concerns you this evening. We are voting on our first item, but that is not of concern to the planning board. If more members come, please let us know. So we have an appointment to make, and then we're going to spend the entirety of the meeting on zoning redesign for building centers. So, I see Councilor Baker is joining us online this evening. Councilor Baker, you are the only member of the committee online this evening, but well.
Thank you. I fled the jurisdiction because there's a storm. I've got to give a talk in Kentucky tomorrow. So I want to make
tomorrow, but that's all right. We're glad to have you. I see we're also joined by other councilors, so I'll recognize Councilor Rick Lipoff, Councilor Mark Laredo, and Councilor Tariq Lucas is who I see at the beginning of the meeting. So our first item is 72-23. I see we are joined by Josna Budarahu. I hope I did you justice. And
it's Josna Budaraju.
Josna Budaraju.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I was, practicing it. I got it wrong. Thank you for that. And this is her honor, the mayor appointing Josna Budaraju. Did I do it wrong again?
No.
Chestnut Street, Newton, as an alternate member of the Planning and Development Board for a term of office to expire on July 31st, 2026. Now, normally, we welcome you to the committee and ask if you'd like to say a few words about yourself. We've looked at your resume and so forth, but for the record, briefly describe what interests you about the Planning and Development Board.
Sure. So, sorry, I'm fighting a bit of a sore throat right now. I want to thank all of you for having me join this committee. For a brief introduction of myself, I moved to Newton about 2 years ago at the height of the pandemic. And during that time, I got a brief chance to get to know the city, and I've been looking for different ways to get involved with my community. And in addition to doing fundraising for academia and nonprofits my entire career, my other passion has been in public policy. And so when the opportunity for me to be an alternate member of the Planning and Development Board came up, I thought this would be a great way for me to further my interest in the area and get to know the city a little more.
Thank you. Do I have any questions or comments from members of the committee? Councilor Leary?
Just appreciative that you're willing to serve. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Anybody else? I'll be looking for a motion to approve this appointment.
Ward 5.
Whose word?
Yes.
It's mine, so
Okay, I'll make a motion to.
great. Thank you. We have a motion to approve. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Or abstentions? Counselor Baker, I assume you voted aye as well.
I did, but not audibly. I didn't have it on unmute. I'm just,
All right. Thank you so much. And you're welcome to stay with us and observe. Normally, the Planning and Development Board has been joining us on a regular basis, except when our meetings conflict and on the same evening, and particularly for what we're talking about tonight. So if you have nothing else to do this evening, you're welcome to join. If you were not planning on that, we'll understand.
I think I'm going to step away, but thank you all. And it was wonderful meeting everyone here today.
Thank you. Lovely meeting you. Okay, so you all received additional materials in your packet for the next item. The memorandum in the packet is an expansion of the one that served last time, very much in line with what we did last June when the proposal before us was broken up into pieces so that we could discuss and weigh in on and hopefully reach consensus on individual parts before we get to the whole. And this right now, our work right now is very much to inform staff and our consultant who's not with us tonight, but to inform the team so that they can prepare the version 2 draft. So the item, just to read it in, is 3822, discussion and review relative to the draft zoning ordinance regarding village centers. And I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Cairo. You see in the memo, we have 4 substantive areas we'd like to discuss tonight. All things are related and iterative and integrated, so I expect the conversation may wander, but we would like to focus on these 4 items so that we can, see in particular what the committee and council are thinking with respect to each one. Ms. Cairo?
Actually, Mr. Lemon.
Oh, Mr. Lamel, you're really back. Okay.
I have a process question. Are we going to ask questions as we go through each section or waiting to the end?
Each section.
Okay.
All right, happy to continue this conversation that we started at the last meeting. Go to the next slide. As the chair mentioned, focusing in on the 4 items of the framework of them, I forgot how many, there's probably 7 or 8 total. But tonight we want to focus on 4, the parking requirements, which is going to be a continued conversation, looking at the recommendation to remove the special permit allowance for an increase in height building footprint, making sure we're consistent when we're mapping and zoning city-owned parcels, and the newer items that were part of the packet, the revisions to the Village Center 1 standards. Next slide. And again, just wanted to show these kind of in context where we were last meeting, where we are tonight. In the middle is in bold, and then where we're going to be going, which we can talk about maybe a little bit more at the end. Next slide. So again, the first item, just to reiterate and maybe ground us again, because some of this was presented at the last meeting. If you can go to the next slide. The recommendation as we move from version 1.0 to 2.0 is to either to reduce or and update the requirements for parking for residential uses within these village center zones. The proposal hasn't changed since the last meeting, but I just want to reiterate here. We originally proposed 1 per unit across the board for residential properties, looking to go down to 0.5 per unit. That would be a minimum. And then really making sure that we are taking into account some data and some things we're going to see shortly or re-see, as well as looking at best practice and what we're seeing across the country is that if you're really close and within a quarter mile of a transit station, instead of having a minimum going towards a maximum, setting the minimum at 0 and setting the maximum at 1. And then when we're looking at adaptive reuse, when we're looking at the conservation of existing buildings, we want to make it even more lenient and have no parking requirement, so that we can get that goal of reuse when possible, because we know it's not easy. Next slide. So this is just some of the data from the MAPC Parking Perfect Fit study. They've done this study, I think, 4 times now across the region. These are also studies that are happening across the country. And what the study is finding is that there is way more parking at these various multifamily developments across, in this case, Metro West, that are being utilized by the people and obviously the number of units that are living there. Next slide. These are the counts. There were 9 properties in Newton that were surveyed, and it was almost a differential in almost 500 spaces that were essentially vacant and not being utilized by the units that were in these 9 buildings. Next slide. You can see what happens to parking that doesn't get used, and when you add that up, it's almost 3 acres of space that is just sitting there. And again, these spaces underground can be upwards of $100,000 a space. Next slide. And just like I said before, this type of work is happening across the country, across the globe where appropriate, but really cities and towns all over are reducing and eliminating parking requirements in various levels, right? They're looking at across, just citywide, statewide, at downtown, city center levels. I guess what we're looking at is kind of Main Street / city center district level updates. So we're in good company across the country. So I'll leave it at that. First, I know that we're going to continue the discussion on.
So, I wonder if we should just go around the table and Councilor Baker as well. And each of you say what you're thinking about right now in terms of parking standards. I'm looking at Councilor Prince. I'm just going to go around, not in order of ward, but just around the table. How's that? Because I think you're eager to speak, Councilor Prince.
I think probably better to go in order of importance. So I fully support removing the parking minimums. I've said it many times. I don't think it makes sense as a concept in terms of zoning that we would require builders, either commercial or residential, to construct parking, to tell them how much parking they need. So fully support that. Interested to hear about we've heard a little bit about it, but the maximums, it's an interesting concept. I'm fine including that or not including.
Okay. So Councilor Wright,
I have a lot of questions first.
about this?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the things that you mentioned is 0.5 mile or quarter mile from transit station. So how are you measuring it? Is it the crow's by, or are you going to use street and how to walk there? And then what are you using as the starting point? Like the train stations on the north side, are you counting from the top of the stairs, or are you going down below, or how are you making those measurements?
We have and I looked this up, in 2021, we did maps of 10 and 15-minute walk sheds. Which roughly align, 10 to 10-minute roughly aligns with the quarter mile, but it is not as the crow flies. That has a bit more data looking at crossings, grade changes, things like that. I know those specifics, I think it would be in the whatever proposed zoning that we'd have to essentially map it, and it would have to be voted on. So those metrics would be provided when we share the updated map, but it wouldn't just be as the crow flies.
Okay, so then, my next question, so this chart of how many spots are used and things like that, talking, with Mark Development. So their parking changes per month, and right now they're at basically 1-to-1, and sometimes it is lower. And it seems to be, if it's an all senior building, they have a lot lower number of parking requirements. So in Trio is right near the train station, so that's less than a quarter mile. So I worry a little bit going maxing it out at 1, and I think a little bit higher, and the developer should, make that decision, what they think they need. What's the interesting thing is you show the map up here of all these parking minimums eliminated across the country. What'll be interesting is how many of those have allow on-street parking all year and how many don't. That could be a big difference of, removing parking completely. So, and then looking at this chart here, so some of these places are over 1, but and one of them, and they're generally farther away from the train station, or transit, I should say. But I don't want to, I like to have some minimum, and I can see if it's close, going down to maybe a half to 3/4, but I don't want to max out at just 1. And this, we're just discussing VC2 and VC3. We're not discussing parking for VC1 yet.
We haven't proposed different parking for VC1 at this time, so we'll get into the other metrics for VC1 later this evening. But as of now, we haven't proposed different parking standards, so that is a point that we would like to discuss.
Okay, in general, especially in VC1 or in the residential neighborhoods, I mean, we're pushing for just 1 parking spot per unit, but generally most of the developers want more than 1. And people are coming with more cars and stuff. And I was talking to a realtor, she's doing a unit with 1 parking spot for the condo, and they're having a hard time, selling it. So, you don't open up you don't have a big enough, or a big audience for those when you do reduce it quite a bit. My next question is, especially if eliminating it, my question is, about get spots, if you need PT, someone coming in, tutor, family, nannies, whatever, overnight guests. And then the other thing is too, I think I put in the other one is, if we're gonna eliminate it at all, for, I think like for historic buildings and things like that, I think there should be some spots for, different type of rental companies for cars or something that people would have a chance to, use that, like zip cars or something like that. Maybe having a couple of those. If you're going to completely eliminate it, I think people need some options. But I'm not sold on eliminating parking.
Okay, in the
It-
quarter mile.
Yeah, and I do just want to clarify, it doesn't mean anyone will actually build zero parking. So by eliminating parking it means eliminating the parking minimum required. You know, as you can see here, it varies quite a bit across these developments, how much parking is actually being used. So, you know, the best practice lately is really to let the market figure that out, let each developer figure out what is right for them. I would be surprised if anyone came in with zero parking, but I think it, you know, be great to see if we could add more residents without adding more vehicles or more traffic.
Well, in looking at this up here, I think is Pelham House also senior housing or no?
I'm not sure. off the top of my
Where is
head.
Pelham House is very low income housing in Newton Center. The,
NCDF, is that?
it was, it was Community Living Network, CLN, who are no longer an entity.
Got it.
But it's very low income housing and it's, 8 or 10 units.
Yeah, 10. Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Yep, so I'm not for eliminating, possibly, again, for incentive for keeping a building instead of tearing it down, and we're gonna hopefully talk more about that specifically. I could see that being the incentive for that, but for in general, especially, for new builds, then I'd like to see some type of minimum.
okay. So when you say you're not for eliminating, you mean, just so for folks who are watching, not for allowing, or how do I say this?
Eliminating parking minimum.
Not for eliminating the minimum
Required.
requirement, right? Okay,
And I think the maximum, making a maximum 1.0, I think that's too low.
okay. Thank you. Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I agree with what Council Christman said. I think we've been on the same page in that for a long time. I want to eliminate the parking minimums. Especially, quarter to a half mile from transit, especially on the south side and the Green Line. I think in this case, the more I've gotten into this and understanding and talking to developers too, they're gonna dictate to one point that, what they think that the, where they're building this, if they wanna go with no parking spaces at all. Which would probably, might happen. I know it happens in Boston, but it might happen, let's say in Newton Center, 2 blocks from, the Green Line train station. And then they might, a lot of places now are only doing 1 space per unit. And if they're near transit too, they'll do 1 space. But so I'm seeing more of, I don't want minimum. I certainly don't want to overload us with parking spaces. And if you look at the big picture, then this places we don't need cars, we don't need parking spaces, and I think if we have them, then you're looking at who's gonna move into a place without a car, and there's a lot of people that are doing that today. So that's where I stand on this right now.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Ryan. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am in favor of letting the developer make the call on this. I think that developers have a lot of money on the line. They do their homework and they know what location they're in, who their clientele is that they're making a pitch toward either buying or renting. If they can make the call better than we can on a blanket basis. If you look at the chart that we have in front of us right now up on the screen, the utilization runs from very low to at Pelham House 0. Myrtle Village at about half, 0.57, to one of them that's much higher than all of the rest at 1.8. Most of them seem to fall around 1. So, for example, in Newton Center, the church next door to the old Walgreens, I can't identify the church because it's been not been a church for a long time. But it's the building, the old church building that the Brookline Bank is now in, and there's a restaurant in there. That building was going to be something like 44 or 43 units with no parking, 0 parking. And I spoke to the developer at the time. I think the project is stalled because of economic conditions right now, the high interest rates and the high cost of labor and materials. But they said that they were looking for people who didn't want cars. And I think it's marvelous to have 44 units in the middle of Newton Center with no cars. And if people have a car, they keep it somewhere where they rent a space, and they Uber or Lyft or walk to wherever their car is. So I think that the marketplace is the very best place to determine how much parking needs to go with a building. So I would eliminate it. I would probably not put a maximum of 1.0, however. There are some places like Lexington, 192 Lexington, look it on the chart. The utilization is 1.8. It's quite a walk from most transit, and people probably need more cars there than they do in a place like Newton Center. So I think the marketplace, let's let the marketplace decide.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just for a point of clarification, the
Sure.
maximum would only apply if you're within a quarter mile, so anywhere else, there are no maximums.
Okay,
Okay.
so we're all clear on
Yeah.
that. Thank you for that. Also for folks watching, it's good to remind us of the metrics. Skip me, Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think everyone knows where I stand on this. I think I've been aligned most closely with Councilor Krinsman on this item, and I feel very, very strongly that we need to eliminate parking minimums. Now I'm speaking specifically to residential parking requirements within a quarter mile of transit, but I could be persuaded that that should be expanded. And I'm okay with the parking maximum of 1. I think the data and economics has shown what removing the owner's parking requirements does for both our businesses and also for really attracting people who want to live car-free or car-light. If you will offer a lot of parking, you're going to get people with a lot of cars, and that's the way it works. And we also know that it's much better for the environment and it benefits housing affordability as well. So I'm totally on top of this. And one thing I did notice from this, and I just wanted to clarify it, it looks like the newer developments, they keep going lower and lower on our parking requirements as we learn from the developments we built that we've way overbuilt the parking. So tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the trend here.
That's right. And then we see the utilization is even lower often than what gets built, right? So we started at the requirement of 2. I think then there was some comfort of 1.5 for a while, then like 1.3, 1.25. Recently, we've seen 1, or even sometimes a little less than 1.
Okay, so if you're paying attention to the data, it's clear where we're going on this. I mean, this is what it's telling us, and I'm very strongly supportive.
Okay, thanks very much. President Albright.
Question for you first.
Sure.
Do we have any experience in the literature about how all these other cities are doing with their with reducing their minimum?
I can look up more specifics. I do know the city of Buffalo, a bunch of years ago, reduced they eliminated entirely across the city, and they're seeing housing and affordable housing developments that were previously infeasible come online and be built.
Okay,
That makes sense. I of course hear from, as Council Wright referenced, the overnight parking ban. I hear from people who move into a place and don't have a car, have a car, but have no place to put it. And that I guess I'm the one that hears most about those people because that's I'm an interest in that issue. And I don't know how that's gonna get solved when people have a car and they have no place to put it and they can't put it anywhere in the winter. I don't know. That worries me. The 0.5 max minimum. It feels like it, can you put the other chart back again? The 0.5 minimum feels like it might be a little too low. I mean, I'd rather have a 0.8 minimum. If I could interest anybody in that, going a little bit higher. And I feel the same thing about the maximum. Only because my son had an apartment in Seattle and there was no parking space that went with it. And he was shifted around all the time that he lived there, a year and a half. He had to shift around this parking space, that parking space became available. So luckily there were spaces, but it feels to me like you have to have a little bit of cushion. I don't know if it's 1.2 or 1.1 or something, but just to give a little bit of cushion.
This is on the maximum.
At the maximum, yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't apply to the required minimum outside of a 0.25 mile? Or are you saying, thinking of both? So the minimum requirement is proposed as 1 if you're outside of the 0.25 mile.
The maximum. The maximum is 1 within a quarter mile.
Right.
And the minimum is 0.5 outside of a quarter mile.
0.5 outside a quarter.
Yeah.
mile. Okay.
So I think, what did I say? I think it should be a little higher.
Yeah.
I think I said
Well, we
0.8.
think both should be a little higher.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that straight.
Yeah.
Thank you. Counselor Baker. You're muted, Counselor Baker.
Yeah, I'm trying to manage the technology. I'm not as facile as my colleagues. So it is probably no surprise to the collective conversation that I'm not as enthusiastic about the planning department proposal as it may be. As I look at this chart that's currently up on the screen, there are places where the use of the spaces in some cases is greater than the requirement, like Avalon is 1 space included, but it's more than that on Newton Highlands. I think that without going into the details here, I think it's really important to distinguish what we're thinking about in Newton from necessarily other places. Because Newton is a collection of villages, and the idea of transit, the transit is basically a hub and spoke system. And if you're thinking that the parking space is designed to take a commuter car off where you can provide somebody access to going in town, that's one thing. But I think that part of the reason people bring cars, and I think the natural context in Newton is that they're going in all sorts of directions. And cars are helpful for doing all sorts of things that we all do every day. And the concern I have is certainly I wouldn't be in favor of having a maximum, imposing a maximum limit. But I'm also very concerned about just assuming that we can reduce the parking requirements because it's near transit. The transit is going to be helpful to some situations, but not all of them. And so I think I don't like to see people, as President Albright indicated, come into a situation and say, well, gee, I'd love to be able to bring a car, I need a car, but I don't have any place to park it. And it ends up on the public streets and into the neighborhoods, which we're trying to avoid. So I think this is not necessarily our situation, even though there are other places in the country that have been doing this. I'd like to see something that looks a little more like our circumstance, thought through carefully, so that we don't end up creating an externality, an effect of parking demand from the units that the unit can't supply and is going to be imposed on the surrounding properties. So I'm I guess the summary, I'm not in favor of a maximum limit, and I would like a minimum limit more along what the planning department recommended earlier. And I'm cautious about the, although open to persuasion about the transit, because again, I don't think that it's automatically applicable to the kind of needs that people will want to serve in Newton, including servicing commercial and school and all the things that we all do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. I guess just to complete the committee's conversation, I'll say, I'm not exactly sure what's right, but I am in favor of reducing the minimum for sure. It seems to me clearly, as Councilor Leary said, the data is going in a direction of you and Josh are right. Yeah, okay. I think of what it's like to live just outside Boston or in South Boston or someplace like that, right? And where I'm very familiar with young people living in Boston. My daughter's one. And all of the folks they associate with there seem to be, I know anyway, one-car families because they don't need the car for everything. They can walk most places. And we're struggling to get to be that. And so is a half a space per unit the right minimum? I'm not sure when we get into our villages and we're between a quarter and a half mile from the T, that's certainly walkable. But we're also, and I guess we have to have a separate conversation about BC1 because that's a very different animal. I guess I'm just not sure. I'd like to lower it. I'd like to, as President Albright said, I think a 0.8, given where our numbers are going, is very reasonable. I'd like to talk more about associated parking needs. As Councilor Wright said, but I think that's what on-street parking during the day is for the most part. So I just want to get some clarity around that. In terms of within the quarter mile, I think having a maximum is fine, because otherwise we're not going to be able to spur the kind of development we want right close in that housing we say we want, very close in to public transportation. There need to be some mechanisms for bringing people without cars and people who want to live without cars, and they're going to be able to live a little less expensive because they don't have cars. I was going to go out to other folks, but is this, you want to just say quickly something about this?
Yeah.
Councilor Wright.
If you're done, are you done?
I am now. I was seeing your hand. I was trying to look because I was trying to concentrate on what I was saying.
So the thing is, the villages are not created equal. And you have the Green Line, which I think there's 130 trains a day, every so many minutes. You never look at the schedule, you just go to it. Versus the trains, there's I think a 9-hour section during the day from 1 o'clock to 7:30 or maybe 7 hours. There's no train at all. So they're not created equal, our transportation hubs. The other thing is, we do have public lots that people can park overnight, but not all villages are created equal there, the number of spots. Because I don't know if there's a public and not an MBTA lot in Waban. And there's a few in West Newton, but not many, versus Newton Center has a lot more. Because some people do park in those overnight.
What does that have to do with?
Well, because if you're eliminating parking completely, and the unit doesn't have any parking.
Eliminating
Parking requirement.
parking requirements, not eliminating it.
Yeah. And now, someone moves into a place and now they need a car. Well, in many of the village centers, they could park overnight in, the city lots.
During the winter.
Well, even during the summer too.
Well, in the summer they could park on the street.
Yes, but during the winter. So they have that option if they wanna have a car, but not every village has those options available.
But this is, in my imagination, right now, this is, we're trying to encourage small units built compactly near public transportation. And that seems ideal for a one-car family, or in some cases, for people who don't want to have a car. So that's
I think
my
on the-
opinion.
Yeah, I think on the Green Line, it's, you know, doing the spoke transportation, you have a lot more options to get into the city versus on the train. I think it's something like 9 trains a day or something. And so when I take the train, I always look at the schedule. But when I take the Green Line, we just show up. There's a huge difference between the transportation.
I'm gonna, let me go to Ms. Kyra first and then Ms. Ryan, Council Ryan.
Sure, so I
Yeah.
do want to point out that Austin Street's on the commuter rail and there are only 44 cars there for the 68 units. So you do have people that are living there without a car, quite a few. They might be taking the train, they might not. It doesn't really matter as long as they're not adding more vehicles. So the goal here is to create housing that the cost isn't artificially driven up because of the parking requirement. And that is giving people the option to live somewhere where they don't need to drive all the time. They may still need a car, or they may decide that living here is not right for them at that phase of life because they need a car for more things. So also having the winter parking ban is not, it's an issue in the neighborhoods too. I mean, you have single family homes that don't have driveways large enough for all the cars. We hear from people that have 4 or 5, 6 cars, so-and-so's home from college, they have nowhere to put their car. It doesn't mean we should require all of these extra spaces that just drive up the cost of housing, encourage more driving. The Avalons are over 1, but they have so much parking. So even with all that parking and at Needham Street, a space coming with the unit, you're still not seeing the rates could be much higher. You could have 537 cars there and you don't. So there certainly is an appetite for having fewer cars. If we bring that requirement down, we can allow that to happen. As Councilor Danberg said, you'll see developers, they do their homework. They need to make sure they can finance the project. The banks haven't quite caught up fully to embracing zero parking. So they need to make sure they can finance it. They have to make sure they can lease and sell those units. So they're going to make sure that they have the parking they think they need without adding more to the cost to build it. So we're just proposing we let the market, in most cases, dictate. And there'll still be parking, but that we're not driving the numbers, because I don't think we've had the best track record there so far.
Yeah, so I have Councilor Ryan and Danberg. Is that the right order?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
That's right, I got my coffee.
Yeah, I go back to what I've been saying for the last 2 years, okay? When I did my homework and found out what was going on is if you build housing near transit with no parking spaces, I think that's gonna make the builder make smaller units, less expensive. I'm not gonna use affordable. For what I've always wanted to do, and that dictates, I think the parking has a lot to dictate the size of units and who's going to live there. I really do, and it gets the prices down. I went into the math. I don't think we should be, I'm just calling it math to call it something. I don't think we should be bringing in street parking overnight, winter parking lots, a lot of other, it just shouldn't be part of the debate or the equation at the end of what we're doing. If somebody wants to live in a place with no parking, they're gonna live there. I would hope that the realtors would be more honest about this unit has parking, this unit doesn't have parking, this unit has one space, this unit has two. But, that's them. I would hate to think they were deceiving people. I know when I was looking for a summer place in Provincetown, one of the first things I look for, because a lot of them don't have parking, is that it has at least one or two parking spaces. If it doesn't, I move along. In that case, because you just can't park on the street down there. It's just, there's too many cars. But that's the way I feel about it. I just don't think that all this other should come into play in what we're trying to figure out. It'll dictate it, so.
Thank you, Council Ryan. Council Greenberg.
Thank you. The question that I have, if you look at Pelham House, parking, move that, the picture over just a little bit so I can see the title on cut. Yeah, parking included in unit cost, 0.5 spaces. When you have a fraction, or if it's 0.5 or 0.8, is that determined by, let's say a 3-bedroom unit would have the space and a 1-bedroom wouldn't, or how do you figure that out?
Honestly, I'm not sure here. So this is how each of these developments responded to a survey. I included it because that's what we have. That's the information we have. My guess is that that's just the parking ratio. I don't think you're including half a space in the cost of a unit, but that's how they responded to the survey. So it's probably that it's not included.
Again, that was very, very like 30 to 50% AMI, very low income housing.
It's
So-
not likely to have a car. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Do you know if Pelham House was built, had to be built with some parking?
I don't know. So it does provide 5 spaces. I'm not sure what the approval process was for that and what was required. It probably is required to at least maintain those 5 spaces.
Yeah. We have a range of circumstances. The circumstance for very low income or elderly and low income, let's say, is going to be much less than people who are still in the work world, let's say, or going to Killington for the weekend skiing and need to stash a car someplace, even though they don't use it 5 days of the week. So I think that in a larger building, say 10 units, 7 units and more, you are likely to have somebody that needs a car for one reason or another. Again, the developer is I think the best source of making that decision because of the reason that you stated and I stated before, and that is that no developer is going to be able to build because he can't get financed or want to build something that he cannot either rent or lease. So they do their homework and they probably have built before or are looking at similar projects that have been built before and can make that determination. I think that's where I stand is I'm not concerned with the minimum because I think that the developer can much better and more accurately make that decision than the city can because we've had, as you say, not a great track record.
We're also behind the curve, right? It's not that quick to update zoning to reflect recent data. So by removing that minimum, it allows the developer to be more nimble, be looking at what the trends are, what the data is, how that compares to their product, their location, and be adjusting rather than us trying to track data, then update zoning to constantly, we can't stay ahead of the curve.
And if someone, for example, right near the T is going to put in an accessory apartment, I see no reason that we should, that the city should have any input into whether there is a space or not, because sometimes it's for a disabled member of the family or an elderly relative, or if it's for a rental, then the owner can make that determination.
Thank you. I have Councilor Leary and Baker And then I realize there's other folks who have their hands up. I just wanted to keep the discussion in committee till we conclude this piece. So Counselor Leary and then Baker, and then I'm gonna go down the list. I see the hands raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, people will really self-select here, and the city really needs to butt out on, because we know that if the developer is not gonna build something where people aren't gonna wanna live. So we're creating a policy here. It's not really the city's problem to where people park or what parking is available. If they want a parking space, they need to pay for it. They need to arrange it if they really want one, or they choose someplace else. That's how I feel about it. So I'm not really concerned about all these other things that are going on. This is a policy that I think is based on science and data, and it's something that's really important to our village centers and to economic viability and affordability and the environment. And that's all I'll say.
And just one more point on,
Yeah.
since you're on a roll,
Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone, we're talking about 2% of the land area of Newton that these rules are impacting. In case anybody's listening and thinks this is going to impact their neighborhood, the rest of the 98% of the land area of the community. I just think I like to keep that in perspective as I'm looking through these rules. Maybe that's just me. Counselor Baker.
Thank you. Let me just comment on a couple of things that have been said. I wish I were as confident as my colleagues about leaving it to developers' judgment, because I think the part of the reason for setting rules is to try and make sure that we take care of the impacts that the development has. And there may be places that we would desire that nobody bring a car, but at the same time, just looking at the ways people try and live in Newton, I'm not confident that's accurate. The space utilization, again, is I'm open to looking at a lower minimum, but I'm, as I've said before, not interested in a maximum. And I'm also think it's really important not to put the burden essentially on the purchaser to somehow figure out where to go in these contexts. Part of our job is to set the context so that they can have their needs met and the community's needs can be met at the same time. So I'm open to persuasion about specific locations and situations where it makes some sense, but I'm not confident that this proposal as it's going forward is going to be wise for the community at large. So I'll just say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Okay, from the top down, although I think I lost Amy Dane, I saw that she had her hand up. So I hope you're not giving up on us. Councilor Louie, you're next in that case.
Thank you, Chair Crossley. So I just want to start by understanding the data that we're relying on. Are these actual counts that were done by MAPC or the results of some kind of survey?
These are overnight counts that were done by our staff and MAPC.
And when did you do those counts?
I don't recall the dates. I can find that information.
It was in the fall, and it was from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. to 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So you went out to, say, Trio, counted the total number of parking spaces, and by that you mean the private spaces, not the public spaces.
Correct.
And counted 44 spaces that were utilized.
At Austin Street, yes.
I'm sorry, Austin Street. Thank you.
And that's consistent with the data we've gotten from the developer there too over time.
Well, over time or on the same date?
Over time. So we have been tracking and, they give us periodic updates of how many spaces are leased because some of these are, they separate out the leasing of the parking space from the leasing of the unit. So the building, owner does have that data as well.
So you physically or someone in your staff physically went out on a single night and did all these counts?
Multiple staff, yes.
All right. And for Trio, for example, same thing?
Yeah, for all of these.
Okay, same night, you all went out, you did the counts on a night in the fall of 2022?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And did you account when you did these counts for the fact that some of these places of staff who work there?
So We were speaking to the landlords and the building owners as well, to understand that generally they don't have many overnight staff, if any, at these buildings. They're usually staff would be there during the day, and there's sometimes separated out parking, for staff.
Were you able to distinguish that? However, I'm going to use Trio as an example. There's 210 parking spaces that are supposed to be entirely dedicated to residents.
That's correct.
And are any of those residents parking in the open air spaces overnight?
I don't believe so. I think the Mark Development has been monitoring that.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand it. And also, for Austin Street, what's the size of the units?
The number of beds?
I don't mean the square footage. I mean, are they studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms?
It's a mix.
Any 3 bedrooms?
Yes.
More than 5 or 6?
We approved it in.
I don't have the numbers offhand.
Right. I'm trying to, I guess what prompts this is it seems to me that different projects will have very different, potentially very different needs for parking.
Yep.
Depending on who is living there. I mean, for example, a population of a bunch of, right out of college folks, for example, may not have any cars. I think that's a fairly common phenomenon we're seeing more and more of. Families, on the other hand, particularly those with 2 or even 3 children, are much more likely, I would suggest, in a place like Newton to need not 1, but 2 cars. And as their kids age and hit the teenage years of college, maybe going for that 3rd car. So I guess I don't see us accounting for that anyways. But I'm comfortable certainly cutting down our minimum requirement number. I'm not sure exactly where that should land. I'm torn on that. I would be very opposed to putting any kind of maximum. If we truly think the market and the developers know best, then we shouldn't be telling the developers they can't put more parking. You can't have it both ways. Either we're trying to impose our will on the developers and saying, you're going to have a minimum and maybe a maximum, but we can't say, we trust you enough on the minimum, but we really don't trust you on the maximum, and we're going to dictate that. Last question, how does this interplay, if at all, with the MBTA Communities Act requirements that we be family friendly in terms of housing?
Sure. So the MBTA Communities Act actually encourages reducing or eliminating parking minimums. It was also part of the Housing Choice Bill, where the MBTA communities requirements came from. It is an option in the model. It's something the state supports because it really does help make it easier to build housing and make housing less expensive. And
go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think, we're actually in agreement on a good bit of this, in that the needs vary across these buildings and the types of folks who may live there, which is why it makes it really difficult for the city to decide what that right number is across the board.
Well,
so that's why
that doesn't play into your maximum argument, however. I mean, if you think the needs vary, you shouldn't be putting a maximum on it.
The maximum is to get the type of housing and reduce the vehicle usage near transit. And that is a policy decision. And that is saying, okay, the developer may want to put more, but we really want people to be living here without cars or with fewer cars. And then that may be a step too far. That is the direction a lot of places are going, to really try and get the smaller housing, the less expensive housing, fewer vehicles on the road. But that may be too far.
For me, again, I don't think you can have it both ways, number one. Number two, you're trying, at least with the maximum, you're trying to create rules for a completely wide array of transit options. For example, as Councilor Wright pointed out, Wobbins Center, for example, which has a pretty dependable green line, is quite different from the Boston College T-stop, which relies on the B line, and is quite different from West Newton. which relies on a train that goes 3 times a day. So, you know, I just have a problem with using the word transit indiscriminately and trying to create rules that cut across all sorts of places. So I'll leave it at that. I'm certainly open to reducing the minimum. I might even be open to eliminating it. I really need to think that through. I'd be very opposed to us trying to dictate maximums. Thank you very much.
Okay, hear you. Thank you, Councilor Laredo. Mr. Lamel, and then I'm gonna call on Ms. Dane.
So for the maximum, I think why we want to think about a little bit more control there is because we're talking about within a quarter mile of the transit within the center of the village center, right? And this is where urban design, the streetscape is really, really important. And I think if you go across spaces that people like to walk around, like to shop and spend their money, they don't want to see, you don't want to be having a curb cut every 50 feet. You don't, if you have a 50-foot wide lot, you don't want 20 feet of that to be a garage door, right? You want it to be 2 or 3 stores. So I think the control is really strategically placed within that quarter mile because we want to promote an experience for walking, for biking, and for cars driving, right? If there are numerous curb cuts going in and out of lots, that's going to be dangerous and slow traffic down as well in a different way. So I think across the city, the minimum being reduced and then the maximum is in a very small fraction or subsection of that for very specific reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Lamel. Ms. Dane, we lost you, but here you are. So please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say that parking on site makes housing more expensive, which has been mentioned, and requiring parking is to require more expensive housing. And just to refocus this conversation or to put a spotlight on the fact that a lot of people right now are really struggling to afford housing, and that should be sort of a central thing we think about as we balance that with the risk that there could be more parking on street and in neighborhoods than people would hope for. And then other things that people have been mentioning in the discussion, I really appreciate hearing and wanted to repeat, is just that including parking in buildings makes them often uglier and more bulky. Driveways make areas less walkable. Parking encourages driving and traffic is one of the region's biggest problems and contributes to climate change. Our favorite places across the region were largely built before cars and without parking. So people can often really appreciate development that happens without parking. So there are all sorts of reasons for us to move in the direction of removing parking requirements, even at the risk of sometimes inconvenience that there could be added parking used in neighborhoods and on streets.
Thank you. And I should just recognize that you're a member of the Planning and Development Board, because we weren't sure if you were with us at the beginning. So thank you for that. And as always, all members of the Planning and Development Board are welcome to speak.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry, there is one point I wanted to make, I forgot, and that there's an appropriate moment I can just add it. I'd like to.
Well, I have 3 people with their hands up. Can you?
Oh, yeah, I can wait. Thank you. I just can't see. I don't know what's.
Can you raise your hand? Because I can see if you raise your hand. That's okay. I know you want to speak. So if you can't raise your hand, I gotcha. All right. Councilor Bowman.
Hi. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. So there are a lot of things I could say, no surprise to anybody here. Sort of the opposite of Councilor Baker is that I'm a strong supporter of eliminating parking minimums. In fact, I've docketed it now twice in City Council to remove all parking minimums. I think one of the items that's shown here, Pelham House, which is in Ward 6, and I actually remember attending City Council meetings on this when this item was approved, is a perfect example of what happens when we require parking minimums. So this this house, Pelham House, faces Pelham Street, and the way that they're able to get these 5 parking spaces in is the back faces Pleasant Street. So instead of having a backyard and more trees and space for the residents to be, they have a big paved black tarmac in the back of this home. So that's what we lose. We have a garage that's not utilized that maybe could have been 1 or 2 more units. And then we have a big paved black area that could be trees and spaces for people in this house to enjoy their homes. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think that having parking requirements will also eliminate many of the, like this example, like smaller infill development projects will be impossible, even if we require only a half a space or a space per unit. We saw that, and that's how this whole discussion started with UTL, was showing about how many projects lots would not be able to be developed because there just wouldn't be the space for them. We had the example in Watertown, the project that we just approved in land use of a business that was trying to have a storefront for themselves, a sort of workshop and 2 homes up above, and the current required parking was 10 spaces. If there was nothing on that lot in Nonantum, there would only be 7 spaces. There's only room on the entire lot for 7 spaces. So, we put ourselves in these impossible situations by requiring far more parking than we need. And I think that, technology and changes in policies are going to change some of this. I mean, certainly today there's the T, there's walking, there's biking, there's delivery, there's Uber. But also if we, congregate, it's very difficult for us to have shared vehicle use here because we don't have enough people living close enough where people could walk to this. So as we produce more housing, we're going to see more car share opportunities and otherwise. But I think that the most important thing is we need to produce more housing. And so all of these things, I think I would much prefer leave it up to the developer. They're going to produce less parking, and I'm strongly supportive of a parking maximum close to transit or to our village centers. But so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Bowman. Councilor Downs.
Hi, thank you. A lot of good points raised tonight. Councilor Baker raised Avalon Newton Highlands, and I think he sort of misread the columns. And it is there are a lot of columns, so it is confusing. There are 294 units and 537 parking spaces. That means that, and that only 325 of them are used. Now, that's 1.11 spaces that are used per unit. There is 1 space provided as part of the rental cost, and that's what Councilor Baker referred to. And that 1 space is a covered space. In addition, there's more than that. There are spaces outside in the lot that surrounds Avalon. It's a lovely landscaping plan, housing surrounded by parking. And so if you have a second car or a third car, you can park it for free outside. So we do get a little higher usage. What's really interesting to me about Avalon and Newton Highlands is how many people go and use the T, even though the walk is very unpleasant and not as short as it could be. I support getting rid of these costly mandates where we decide that a development should have a certain amount of parking. We say you've got to put in this much parking. in part because it raises the cost of building anything or doing anything, but in part because it's ugly. It also makes it really difficult to save our historic structures and reuse them because they were built with no parking. It makes it easier to preserve them if we do not have a costly parking mandate associated with them. And I understand there's differences in our transit, and there's also differences in the number of services that people are close to. For instance, at Austin Street, it makes no sense to drive to the Star Market because it's across the street. So that's a trip you're going to make on foot. At Trio, it makes no sense to drive to the CVS that's down at the bottom of the building. And the more those destinations are close to each other, the less driving that needs to happen, and actually the less traffic that happens. And there are studies that back that up from across the country in places that are far more car dependent than we are. I have a lot of friends now who are walking Washington Street, West Newton, Newtonville, and beyond because they like to get their steps in and they like to do their errands on foot. They may have a car, they very rarely take a driveway because of that. And we can encourage that kind of lifestyle. It makes people happier, it's healthier, and it's more climate sensitive by not mandating parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Councillor Lucas and then Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had to jump off this call earlier, so I probably missed some important comments and questions. But the parking table that we have in front of us right now, do we have a date of when these counts were taken, or how did you come to these numbers?
You did miss that.
I did miss it.
Councilor Laredo asked that question as well. The counts were, I'll just summarize, the counts were taken in the fall. They were taken between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. so that people would be home sleeping for the most part. And these numbers are consistent with the numbers, and our staff took these numbers and they're consistent with the numbers that MAPC got, and with the developer, some of the developers have been tracking their own numbers as well.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, Madam Chair. So we're only talking about village centers, or was it 0.25 or 0.5 miles within village centers? Is that correct?
Yes, and the other point is that yes, we're talking about a 2% of the city's land area.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
These might apply if someone chooses the overlay district, right?
Of course, yes, that's right. So, I mean, I'm looking at this and, you have Austin Street, Trio, and Woodland, and 0.65, 0.91, 0.96. Folks there are using the parking. I mean, Woodland is literally across the driveway from the train station. And Trio is across the street, and Austin Street is across the street. And folks there are using the parking. So I just don't see how we could, at least right now, eliminate the parking requirement for the residential use when we are near village centers. The Avalons are interesting because someone might want to correct me, but I don't think they're within they're near transit. I don't think they are. And the other ones, are quite frankly, are very small. And Cherry Street is maybe near a village, is near the train station. Lexington Street, I'm not certain it is. I can't speak for Myrtle Village or the Pelham House, but the top three, those are right in the village center. Folks are using the parking. So as of right now, I'm not in favor of eliminating the parking requirement. I don't know how we can justify a parking maximum. We should certainly lower it. Our current ordinance is 2 parking stalls per unit, I believe. Certainly that could be lowered. But what that number should be, I'm open to any and all ideas.
So what we did discuss also at the beginning, Counselor Lucas, or near the beginning of the meeting, is that you're correct to say that we're contemplating eliminating the parking requirement, but only within a quarter mile. And it's eliminating the minimum requirement, not eliminating parking.
Right, yes, if I misspoke, I'm sorry.
Seeing that the data is trending toward using less and less parking, and the number of spaces that we have been requiring through our special permit process over time have been excessive. So we're looking at a lot of very expensive built parking that is not getting utilized. And the conversation then, I'll just repeat this one piece, veered early on toward wanting to encourage development that does not require parking. So that, actually letting the developers, for the most part, determine who their market is. But if we have a parking minimum at I don't want to get this confused. No parking minimum within a quarter mile, and a maximum of 1, then only people who are willing to live with a car or without a car are going to be moving into those places. So we are, I guess, doing that, trying to bring in more people with fewer cars, basically.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think Austin Street was 1.5. Looking at this, if my math is correct, looks like it was 1.5. I hope.
No.
And, no.
We required 1.25 spaces for Austin Street, but we got 0.65 utilized.
1.25.
1.25 is what we required. For Trio, we required 1.5.
1.4 it comes out to.
1.4.
1.4, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so what 1.4 is high. I'm not suggesting 1.4. I think in land use for the larger projects, we've been at a 1-to-1. That's what we did for the Oakley Spa in Newtonville. We did a 1-to-1. That's the one that comes to mind that is most recent. And I think the other one, the bank in West Newton, that was also a 1-to-1. And I am happy with those parking requirements in the residential areas. It's just the eliminating the parking requirement the data suggests that folks are driving and the developer is willing to provide it. So, but I'll let others speak to it. I don't want to take up more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lucas. I'll go to Councilor Norton, who hasn't spoken yet. And then the other 2 councilors who have your hand up, I'm just assuming you intend to have your hand up, or did you leave it up from last time?
I intended to leave it up, or I'm trying to figure out the technology, but I'd love to talk when you have a chance.
Okay, all right, Councilor Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry that I was in finance for the first hour, so I'm sorry if I missed this, but just wondering, is this parking discussion related to our compliance with the MBTA Communities Act? I'm very eager to see us comply. My understanding is that we have to have something in place by the end of this year, which is relatively soon. And it's also my understanding on good information that the state funding our commuter rail upgrade is related to our compliance. So I know that we had already begun the village zoning prior to that, but I would hope that we would be focused like a laser on whatever it takes to be in compliance with that law, and then whatever needed to be filled in later we could get to. So just wanted to see what if what we're talking about now is related to that.
It's all ultimately related, but I'm going to let Mr. Lamel speak to specifics.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think first and foremost, we're trying to do what's best for our village centers, but it does very much interrelate to our compliance with MBTA communities, because when you plug all of your information, the zoning that you're putting forward as complying, the rules all get factored in and it determines how many units you get. And as you know, we need to meet a certain number of units. Parking requirements will drag down the number of units we can put on each of our lots and therefore drag down our ability to comply with MBTA communities.
Okay, how soon do you think we will have a, because you go backwards from December and then we need to discuss, how soon do you think we would be voting on? And again, I'm sorry, I don't come to ZAP frequently. And
The meeting, because we're going to talk about that timeline after we get substantive areas.
Okay.
This being the first of the 4 substantive areas that we want to discuss tonight, but I'll make sure we get to the timeline issues.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. And with time in mind, Councillor Baker and Bowman and Krinsman and Wright. Councillor Baker.
So 3 quick ones, I hope. One is, I would hope the planning department would think a little bit about the question of whether the spaces are shared or whether they're assigned, because I don't know exactly how that plays out in terms of the effective demand. And also whether they're owned or rental units and whether there's a distinction to be made there. I just don't know the answer to that, but I'd be curious. Second, the idea of not having a car still implies access for some sort of ride sharing. And again, that implies some sense of what the streetscape is going to be and how you would handle the drop off and pickup. There have been parts, I understand, of Newbury Street, for example, where there have been some very active uses that have caused difficulty. And I would guess I'd be interested in what the department's view of how these things work together. Third, I think that the point Ms. Dane made is an important one. And the question is, as opposed to just a blanket within a quarter mile of transit, whether there's specific areas that look most appropriate for parking requirement reduction because of the considerations that have been indicated, rather than just have it be a function of a distance to a transit stop. Again, I'm concerned that Newton is different from just a center city, and that's part of the reason. And then the final point is just that I think parking, you want to have more spaces than you actually have demand. Anybody who's tried to get into the parking lots at Trader Joe's of sometimes, for example, understand the problem of people circling to try and find a place to land. So there is some benefit in having more than you need, but not obviously more than is a comfortable margin. So what that number is, I don't yet know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Bowman.
I will be quick. 3 quick points. One is, I think another outcome of the perfect fit studies that had been done in the past, and I think this is an example, is that the more parking that is available, the more parking that is utilized. And that's, something that they see across the board. 2 is, I think that removing the parking minimums or significantly reducing them might also open up some opportunities where, if there was to be, say, a development, wouldn't happen at Newton Highlands, but say a development by Avalon, near Avalon, Newton Highlands, they have a lot of parking there, and maybe they build some housing with 0 parking, and the parking that's available is for them to walk a block or 2 or more to another facility where parking is available. I think that because we do have spaces where there's a lot of available parking, it would be a shame for it just to sit empty, but to provide some other options. And 3, I think this is the point that I heard from Councillor Baker and Ms. Dane, was that the location of transit isn't the only thing that's going to make it easier for you to live without a car, to live car light. But living close, as I've said in the past, living close to a grocery store, a coffee shop, restaurants, or things, CVS, or things that you do every day. We do a lot of driving, or getting around, a lot of trips that aren't going back and forth to work. So those would equally be things that would enable people to live without driving or without having a car. So even if something's not close to transit, or it's a half a mile from transit, but it's immediately adjacent to, say it's in Four Corners, and it's, you know, Walgreens and Whole Foods and restaurants, that you could have a reduced parking requirement there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Bowman, next time you might want to turn your volume up. We were straining to hear you. We got the points though. You don't have to repeat it.
So, thank you.
Counselor Maliki, you haven't spoken yet. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to note that somebody said how, you know, we want to attract these people with, you know, the one car or the no car. And we might very well do that, but people's circumstances change. And suddenly that's when we're getting the emails about please overturn the winter parking ban. Because, I mean, just the most recent example is that small flurry of letters we got from people within like a 2-minute walk of the Elliott T station. And in one case, literally 2 houses away, who are saying, you know, gee, our, you know, kids growing up, they're driving now. We need more cars than we have spaces for in our driveways or garages. So in this, we've had, at least I've had similar letters from people in West Newton, you know, a couple that bought a condo with 1 parking space and gee, where do we put our second car in the winter? And, you know, the roommates who rent a place with 1 space, but they've got 3 cars. So it really seems kind of aspirational to think that you're going to maintain the car light people that initially move in. I think they're not that different. People who live, you know, quote unquote, near transit aren't necessarily all that different than people who live further than half a mile away in terms of their need for a car to do other things. Even if they can walk to Trader Joe's or whatever, they've got doctor's errands or kids to take to soccer or whatever. So I don't know that it's, I guess I'd like I'd like us to put away the idea of getting rid of the overnight winter parking ban if we're going to contemplate getting rid of parking minimums, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Maliki. Again, at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about these kinds of things, but most members of the committee said, you know, that these kinds of circumstances are really not our problem. We can't imagine what a person's needs are going to be so many years into the future. People decide where they want to live based on what's going to accommodate their needs. So that's the other side of that conversation. But thank you. And I have 2 more folks at the table who want to speak. Again, it's almost 8:30. We do have some more items to go through, but Councilor Krinsman and Wright.
First, a question for the chair. What's our goal with each of these things? Are we trying to get to a straw vote? Are we trying to make a decision tonight? Or are we just all?
I think that we can take a straw vote, but it was very clear going around the table, which is why I did that, how members of the committee are feeling toward this. Does staff feel like you got good information for moving forward? Okay, and in terms of any more information that anybody would like to see.
Okay, I mean, I agree with that. I thought it was clear an hour ago. That's why I'm wondering. I think we want to go with that.
We do. We do have other counselors on the call though, and that's terrific because other folks are getting up to speed after finance or whatever with, you know,
Sure.
this as well.
Okay, then I'll make my point very quickly.
Yep.
I think when it comes to decisions like this, there's the past, there's the present and the future. When we're talking about zoning, we're talking about the future. I hear a lot of discussion about the way things work, the way people operate, a lot of discussion about today, how we use spaces. And I see discussion about the past, what the zoning decisions were, what the circumstances under which these were built. I think we need to be careful to align discussions of the past or the present or the future with where they belong. That's sort of the first thing. I want to say that this is a very helpful chart. It might be helpful to actually add the distance from a transit station to this so that we can sort of see where things would fit, especially if we play with the different metrics.
Maybe the year they were built.
Sure, you know, and maybe like what the zoning required, right? If it was a 1.5, if it was a 1.25, it's helpful.
Can I just?
I-
Let him
Okay.
finish, please.
I think I'm persuaded that it makes sense to have a parking maximum in some areas. I think Councillor Bowman made a really good point about, which I think aligns with the MAPC data that we saw in terms of proximity to transit wasn't necessarily the sort of outcome determinative factor for whether people utilized a car or didn't. It may be the best proxy we have, and that's fine, but I think it's worth at least considering why are we making these decisions where we're making them. I think one thing I could see, I don't want to complicate this, but is, and if I wasn't clear earlier, I'm in favor of eliminating the minimums across the board. Okay, whether you're outside of a sphere of a transit station or not. Okay. I think I would support the maximum around a transit station or the proximity of where we think it's optimal to have, no car housing. I would understand if we wanted to add a component of an allowance for a special permit to exceed that. If a developer wanted to come in and sort of make the case, we want to build, 1.5 in this area for whatever reason, I could see that. So I will stop.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Council Wright?
Going back to this chart, and what it appears to me is that the more affordable housing there is, or if it's senior housing, they do have lower parking utilization, because Trio and Austin Street should be basically the same, because they're, just across from the pike from each other, but there's a big difference. There's a 50% difference in the parking between Austin Street and Trio, but Austin Street's a third affordable versus Trio's only 15%.
No, it's higher.
Trio's higher. Also, Austin Street's all at 80% AMI, and Trio is the split of, the average of 65 plus the additional, I think, workforce housing.
Well, I'm not counting the workforce, but it's 15 plus
what
workforce.
MAPC found, so MAPC did statistical analysis of all the data, so not just Newton, but across the region, as well as their previous perfect fit study. What they found was the number one factor influencing whether people had cars was whether there was parking. Transit affordability played in a bit, not as much as they expected. So number one was whether there was parking.
So then why would Austin Street and Trio be 50% difference?
Those are individual projects across the board. That's what they found through their analysis. I'm not sure, just the people who chose to live in Austin Street, I don't know if it has something to do with how they marketed it, or if it's the amenities that were already there in place, whereas Trio, being a new building on the other side of Pike, takes a little more time to get, that ground floor up and running. And maybe some earlier residents felt they needed cars. I don't know. But we see that people can live without cars in Newtonville and near the commuter rail.
And then my next question is more towards Zach and the MBTA and how they're going to count in our zoning. I thought it's basically when we zone for that area, they're going to use 1,000 square feet to count as the, so if we zone in the area and you can build a 10,000 square foot lot, the MBTA was, or 10,000 square foot building, the MBTA would say, okay, that's going to count for 10. Now, whatever that goes there, it could be 20 units, it could be 5 units, we get 10 as the number.
It's not quite that simple. So they're looking at that, but they're also looking at all of your other rules, your setbacks, if you have FAR, footprints, heights, parking is a big one to see if you can fit that number of units. What we found through our initial analysis was parking was the driver for most things. So parking, you maxed out on your units based on parking or based on your lot area per unit, whereas you could still have a bigger building. So the state is checking that our other rules aren't making it so that you can't hit that maximum number. So they're accounting for parking, they're accounting for everything.
Thank you. Can I ask a quick question? Sure, President Albright. What happens if you just have a maximum and no minimum? Like if we just had 1.1 is the maximum across both of these categories and no minimum at all, is there any experience with that?
Yeah, I think that's what some communities are going to is maximums instead of minimums. That was MAPC's recommendation from their analysis.
But then what would the MBTA?
And the requirement
Part.
would be
Zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many units would they count? So are they gonna use the 1,000 square foot? So you can put the 10,000 square foot building there. And it will suffice with the parking, there's no problem because there's no parking required. So now, how many units are they going to count that building as? Are they using 500 square feet per unit or 1,000 or what?
So that, we can get into that more. We're gonna go spend more time on MBTA communities at the end of the month. The parking maximum doesn't impact our calculation. It's the minimum that they're going off of.
So to answer that question, so what number are they using then?
0.
If it's a
So then
minimum.
we can have 100, get 100.
They're using,
No, the size of the apartment. what
so
are
they're
they
not
using?
varying the size of the apartment, I don't believe.
So
But like
they're
I said,
using
we're,
1,000 square feet per unit?
I think so, but like I said, we're gonna spend more time on MBTA communities with our consultant who has really dug deep into this at the end of the month. For the purposes of this conversation about parking, they're factoring in our minimum requirements.
Okay. I would be interested in entertaining a maximum, but no minimum at all. I'd love to know apparently a lot of communities have done that, so I'd love to know. If you could pick 1 or 2 and ask them how they're doing. Get that information.
Thank you. Can we have that by next meeting, do you think? I'm not sure I think we have some clear thinking going around the table. At least each person has some clear thoughts. And I'm not sure we are ready to take a straw vote. It
Can I
sounds,
ask a question, Madam Chair?
just a moment.
And if they
Would the-
require, or if they have overnight parking on the street year round, that would make a difference.
Yeah. So am I right? Or are we not quite ready to take a straw vote, I think?
No, I think.
I agree. Okay, I just wanted to get that sense. Yes, Councilor Laredo.
So I'll be brief. I want to follow up what Councilor Wright just said. When do you think you will be presenting to us regarding MBTA communities and specifically how parking interplays with that? Because you're presenting my read of the guidelines and the statute, you're obviously far more familiar with it, is it talks about a square footage per unit, certain number of units per acre. It doesn't say anything about parking whatsoever in there.
March 29th.
So March 29th, we're going to dig into MBTA communities. We'll have our consultant who is very familiar with the model. There's the guidelines, but there's also the model we have to go by.
Well, so you'll explain it to us more, but the model is not guidelines. It's just one way of complying, right?
Not one way, it's the way. So we are required to use the model created by the state. And part of that is so that they can verify that there aren't other regulations that are further restricting the density that could be built. So
I'll defer certainly till we get that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. I think we have beaten up this item to the extent that we can this evening. And we're going to get a little more information at our next meeting on the 27th. So let's go to the idea of eliminating special permits for additional building height or footprint.
Yeah, it should be pretty quick. We can go to the
Everybody who has said, I'm going to be brief tonight has not been brief. All 4 if we can, yeah. So please go ahead, Zach, I'm sorry.
To a couple of the earlier ones.
If we can get through this material, then we will, and we're also gonna have time to talk about the timeline.
I'm just talking about parking.
and we have 2 more meetings this month too.
Yes.
So for this item here, it's essentially the top rows are what we proposed at the end of last year. So it was an increase in a story for each of the proposed districts and an increase in footprint by special permit. The recommendation here is to remove that, to not allow an increase in height or an increase in bulk or mass of the building, the footprint, by special permit. The reason for this is a couple. I think one is we want the zoning to provide predictability. If we have done economic analysis, we have done modeling, we have done urban design studies, and 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 are the numbers that we've been working with. I think the second piece here is that we are looking to, and we're going to be talking about this at the next meeting on the 27th, is that if there is going to be additional height, if there is going to be additional footprint, can we tie that to deeper levels of affordability? And we are using Teal and Landwise to do economic analysis to see how much affordability at what percentages we could require for that extra story, for that extra footprint. And so instead of tying that to the special permit process, we can tie it directly to, just like we are defining our standards, which are in the zoning and our requirements, that is something that can be a standard in the zoning and as part of the requirements.
So just a quick note, I think Zach has been looking at these numbers too long. I'm noting that in the proposed, that should read 4.5 and 15.
That's a copy paste error. Sorry. Yeah, so yeah, we have not,
We're not lowering BC3.
Right. Sorry, this is only about the special permit increase. Apologies.
So,
So I'll get at that.
okay,
That's it.
thank you. So
Thanks
before
for
we
catching that.
again go around the committee, did we lose people online or you're just not showing?
I wasn't showing that.
Okay.
That way we could see the full beauty of the presentation.
Okay, great. Can we have like one person so I can see it if there's any hands coming up? Okay.
No hands.
Thanks. So early on, we talked about eliminating a special permit for story height. It's only very recently we talked about eliminating additional footprint. So before we go around the room, I want to ask a question, which is the footprint is intended for a single structure, not necessarily if you have more than one structure. So it's not additive. I don't have to stay within my 10,000 square feet in VC2. If I have a 5,000 square foot footprint and a 7,000 square foot footprint, we can do that. That's one thing. Other than that, I'm wondering, as from a designer point of view, what is necessarily the benefit of having two buildings on? These sites are relatively small. And so if there's a site that's can accommodate a 12,000 square foot building in VC2, why would we want someone to split the building? So I just want to put that as a question on the table without at least allowing a special permit. If the lot is over a certain size, do we want to force someone to split the building into two buildings? Or do we want to, which doesn't necessarily always work that well on a site, depending on its orientation, right? You're in the village center and you only have one street frontage. And that's the kind of discussion I would like to have so that people are thinking perhaps about the special permit option. What could the special permit option achieve for us on footprint? And what's the pro versus possibly what's the con of doing that? Why do we want to be that controlling? So those are my questions. I don't expect an answer. I just wanted to put them on the table.
Well, I mean, I do think the median lot size, you're talking about a few lots here, right? The median lot size in our village centers is in the 10,000 square foot range.
Right.
It's pretty small.
We have some outliers though.
We have some outliers, and I think the desire for the code from a predictability standpoint and incentive standpoint is to create a certain level of granularity, which I think historic patterns of our village centers have. Smaller lots, buildings up next to each other, variety of heights, massings, things like that. And I think that's what we want to encourage and incentivize. And so I think maxing out the footprint for those larger sites encourages them to break down, so to speak, and recreate that granularity. And yeah.
Okay, I guess for me, I liked knowing that there's outliers, and I think of Lower Falls, which is not transit, doesn't have transit, but it's, you know, has a lot of big lots. But there are a few big lots sprinkled around in our different village centers. But they don't necessarily have a whole lot more street frontage. Sometimes they just go deep, right? So it's a question really. I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering if there's a way to tie additional footprint that you would allow in a contiguous, in a single structure, either by the size of the lot or by special permit considering the size of the lot.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, I'm gonna go this way this time. So,
I mean, I have to start.
no, we're gonna start this way, clockwise. So, Counselor.
Okay, on the issue of allowing I don't know whether you do it with an overlay, for example, or however else you would do it. If we were to allow additional height and tie it to affordability, we would be encouraging what we want to happen. Because what we want is to get as many affordable units as possible. And to get, if we're gonna get units and get more height, well then let them have a higher affordability component. And that number, I think, should be whatever the building can support, because we have to remember that affordable units are supported by something. They don't, they have to be supported by the market rate units. So that percentage is to be determined by how it can be supported. Barney, Mr.
Yeah, just that we're undertaking that very analysis right now and should have a report back for the 27th on that.
Excellent, good.
Very same issue.
And that's part of the rationale for removing that special permit for additional height, right? Is if you can just ask for a special permit for additional height, it's harder to then make it attractive to have the incentive to provide more affordable housing to get the additional height.
I would be very much in favor of that. If there is an affordability component, we allow it to be by right, because there's no need for a special permit if that's what we're trying to encourage. Yes, and that this would, doing this would avoid every project going for a special permit, which we don't want to have happen either. Part of what we're trying to accomplish in all of this work that we're doing is to allow certain things that we want to have happen by right, so that they will in fact happen at a higher rate than they're happening now. Also, deeper affordability historically lowers the parking need. So more affordable we have, there might be more seniors, more people who choose to live without cars or who cannot afford to have cars and live there. So that I think that's the way we want to go here. And on the comment about splitting buildings by requirement, it's not something that I would see working on all lots. I agree that smaller building size very often looks nice in our villages, but depending on the size and the shape of the lot, we wouldn't want to have to artificially reduce the number of units that we could put on that lot, or that the developer would feel comfortable putting on that lot by having a requirement that the building should be split. I would also see if we had, for example, a minimum separation between buildings, then you would have windows that would look onto other windows, where if you allowed that building to be one single building, it could more efficiently be done. very often you need 2 elevators, in locations on buildings. And, requiring a split would, put a very heavy, cost requirement on the developer, because at whatever they are, $500,000 or $750,000 per elevator, that's a hefty cost requirement. And I think that's where I'll leave it, because we've got stuff ahead of us that we have to
Thank you.
discuss.
Thank you. Okay, Council Ryan on question 2.
Yeah, I'm just having a little trouble with this right now. On VC1, I leave it the way it is.
We should probably take we should probably take VC1 out of this discussion because we're gonna look at a whole new set of metrics on VC1.
I think that's.
Sorry.
fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I'm pretty much, I have a problem with the VC1 anyway, so. As far as the rest of it, I thought that we were going higher on the stories, but that's fine, with the 3.5, but,
This should be 4.5 in VC3.
Yeah.
There's
Jack,
a
let me
copy
come with
paste
it.
typo.
4.5 and 15,000, right?
And edit in the PDF, just like,
oh, that's what I'm
just while we're on there.
what's-
If you pull it, you should be able to just, the comments. Piece. Yeah.
okay, folks, we're making a significant edit in the,
I'll edit and send you a new version, Jacqueline. so.
okay,
It's
If
4.5 and 15,000, right?
Correct.
yes.
Sorry, my fault.
For anyone who's online, the proposed for VC3 has not changed. It is still a maximum of 3.5 stories and a 15,000 square foot. footprint. 4.5 stories. I did I just say that?
Yeah.
4.5 stories and I know, I'm just looking at it, and 15,000 square foot footprint.
When you say it has not changed, you mean we're changing it right now?
It's not changed from version 1. So what we're doing is looking at proposed things for version 2.
Just point of clear.
So is it possible to put up what is now the revised standard version?
I'm sorry, Counselor Baker, could you say, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what we're talking about now, because it's disappeared from the screen, I think.
Yes, it is being edited because there's an error in the chart.
I thought there might, okay, all right.
Yes, so we're gonna get it back in front of us in a moment. Ms.
Do you want
Kyra,
comments or on the policy or not?
talking about though, is whether or not we think there should be a special permit offered for increasing the building height by 1 story or increasing the footprint by anything. The point is being made that on March 27th, we are going to be digging deeper into whether and under what particular requirements additional affordable housing provisions could factor into a special permit option. But should
I'm sorry, I understood that. I just wanted to ask her another question, which is, but tell me when it's appropriate. That's all.
Okay, well, I'm going around the whole committee, so if I can just do that in this order in the room, that would be great. Councilor Ryan, did you want to say anything else?
No,
You're good.
I'm lost right now.
Okay, you want me to come back to you?
We're just not, we're just proposing that you don't allow a special permit to increase the height and the footprint in the districts. That the by right height is what it is. We're coming back next meeting and with some ideas for how you could incentivize more affordable housing by allowing more height and footprint. But right now, what we're proposing is just not to allow someone to come in and ask for a special permit for any project for more height.
That makes it easy.
As before, I prefer incentivizing affordable housing with a special permit. That's where I'm at.
So you're for a special permit only in the case of adding affordable housing.
Yeah, by right.
Or by
By
right.
right. Yeah.
It would be a bonus.
Jacqueline, I just sent it
Oh,
to you, but would it
okay.
be, I realize you can't, it's probably on there, right? Oh, you can do it, you can get, it? Okay, okay, great.
You know something, I'm not so sure about the by right, the special permit for
Okay.
affordable housing, I'm not. By right going up higher on, I think we should look at that closer.
But it would be by right conditional upon affordable housing, but it's a fixed number.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying that.
Okay.
We're talking about height.
Yep.
Which a lot of people in this city
Okay.
don't agree with. I don't agree with it in certain places, but, to get the affordable housing, right now I'm sitting on a special permit. For the height, increase the height to get more affordable.
Okay.
And I think what's helpful for this, and maybe we probably could have combined this conversation with the affordable housing incentive in retrospect. But I think just whether you think there should be the ability to just ask for a special permit for more height or
Right.
footprint. We're going to come back with more specifics on the affordable housing, and we can talk about whether it's by right or special permit and how much height, how much footprint.
Right.
But for tonight, I think it's helpful just to know, do you think there should be a special permit option to increase height or footprint?
So, because some people, I mean, some people have said they like the special permit
Yeah.
option, so I guess that's what you're looking
Yeah.
to see. Council, Wright, you're next.
Okay, first I want to start out with questions. I have lots of questions. So this is an overlay district, so we're still, keeping the zoning that we have now.
Right.
And so part of special permit in the village centers, they can request a BU4 or MU4, which is 8 stories. Or
MU4 is 5, BU4 is 8.
isn't, MU4 is what, 5?
5.
By special permit? It's
Yeah,
only
by
5?
special permit. It's 3 by right. 4 under some circumstances by special permit, and 5, I think if it's mixed use by special
I
permit.
actually looked online and I saw 8, so I'm gonna double check.
Yeah, I think that still needs to be cleaned up, but the height is 60 feet, and in the text it says 5 stories.
Okay. I saw 8, but okay, I'll
Yeah,
just check
5.
that again. Okay,
Okay.
5 for
Yeah.
MU4.
Yep.
BU4 is 8, and MU3, which is just right now.
It's just
um,
Riverside.
Riverside, and that's 11. Okay.
And
So
a 10-acre site at the
9
MBTA.
acres, 9 acres. No, but it also says near transit, I mean, near the
Yeah.
pipe, near along the river.
Yeah.
So there are some. Yeah, but there's, like Mark Development, acquires a bunch of lots, different lots, 6 different owners over at Dunstan East. So someone could acquire a bunch of area to do it. So it sounds like, so these things could happen in the village centers. So is there any way to disincentivize those?
Request for rezoning,
Yeah.
that's up to you guys.
Okay.
I mean, we can't say you can't file to rezone a lot, whether we do this overlay or not. I think that's up to the council to then say whether or not that's appropriate.
Director Heath.
Just real quickly, one of the principal underpinnings of this whole exercise in rezoning is so we don't get rezoning, right? So if we go ahead and rezone our village centers and someone comes in and says, hey, I'd like you to rezone this, I think we can say, we spent an awful lot of time establishing a zone. No, you don't get the rezone.
And part of it,
Whereas-
we
yeah,
get
go
it
ahead.
today because the underlying zoning doesn't work, right? We've done the economic analysis and shown in most cases it doesn't work. So that's why we get these rezonings. We've done the analysis to show that this is feasible. So we hopefully will not get those rezonings, but it's ultimately up to the council.
Kim, so, you've done the analysis that this is feasible. Can I see that analysis? And what, did you go, how many different stories? Because I like taking away the special permit. A lot of people, 4.5 stories, which is really 5 stories set back 7 feet. Now you're talking about 6 stories. I like the idea of getting more affordable, but Zach said deeply affordable versus more units of affordable. Which way you're going or you don't know yet?
We're mostly looking at more units.
more units
Our current mix.
at our current mix. So
Okay,
would
because you
get
did say a little bit earlier that the extra story would be for more deeply affordable units, not the number. So I just want to clarify that. So now you're adding another story. So personally, I'd like, then if we're trying to incentivize this, is start with lower heights. And then, you know, what do we want to see as the absolute maximum? And go from there. So, and then, about the special permit on the footprint. I'm torn on that. I think if it's like really close, like 10% or something like that, I could see it, but I wouldn't want to do it for all of them. I mean, they could ask for a special permit to split the lot. You know, that's one way to get around it. So it's basically,
you don't need a special permit to split lots.
oh, you don't, so they can just.
It would be a
request that.
subdivision, so, yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's it for right now.
Okay. Councilor Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I mean, as far as the concept of eliminating a special permit for height, I think I'm fine with that. I think it gives the predictability. I understand the philosophy there. I'm interested in what you're talking about sort of incentivizing deeper affordability, additional height, whatever it is. And what I'm wondering if we're sort of headed towards is almost like option A or option B, and it's you take all of option B or you take none of option B. So option C, sorry, option A, I guess I'm calling the overlay district, right? Option B is sort of overlay B. And what I'm wondering, it feels like to go a different route, you need to simultaneously incentivize the developer to go that route while also giving them something additional that they didn't have under option A. And that's where I think if it's an additional story that is deeply affordable units, I'm not sure that gets in there. Because why would they want to build the additional unit that they're not going to get any revenue from? It's not going to work. But if it's a package of things that, you know, collectively incentivize that behavior or offer it as an option, maybe, you know, equally rewarding, you know, one over the other so that we don't know which way it is, but either one could be done by right, I'm fine with that as well. Does that make sense? Is anyone understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So,
I'll just say, if I confused anybody by saying the word deeply affordable, we should just.
Erase it.
The incentive is more height, which we're talking about later, for more affordable units.
Yeah.
The exact numbers will be at the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just
Director
a
Dean.
further clarification, you weren't totally off the mark, Zach, I think, because affordability means a lot of things, and there's affordable units at 80% of the market. Our current IDP ordinance is at 65, which is a blend of 80 and 50. And that is deeper affordability than you get, say, in a 40B where everything's at 80%. The other point I wanted to make in response to Councilor Krinsman, we're talking about adding an additional floor. It would presumably raise the percentage of affordable units overall. It wouldn't necessarily mean that top floor is all affordable. It's just that the percentage goes up. So
Perfectly understandable. It feels to me like this is the analysis you're going to have to do with UTL. How do the economics work out?
And that's what I'm working on right now.
To generate, again, a package that gives the city a little something, gives the developer a little something, gets more units potentially. And I think it has the bonus under the state law of having more units that could be built by right, which is what the calculation is, right? Okay.
Thank
Good.
you. All right, thank you. Coming back around, President Albright.
So, I think I'm pretty much in agreement with what Councilor Krinsman just said. I'm not opposed to the 5.5 stories. I think I'm pretty consistent with that. But I'm wondering, you know, when Trio came in, it's a large footprint, but we pretty much worked with them to get them to redesign the building so that it looked like three separate buildings.
Sure.
It came in as one massive building, but now it looks like three separate buildings. So I think I'm hearkening back to the conversation that Councilor Crossley started with about the footprint.
Sure.
And if our design guidelines had something in them about it larger than a certain footprint, you have to do something to make a building look like it's smaller.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how to do that in design guidelines. That's not my expertise, but we were able to get there with Trio. So
I think there's a couple things at play here. I think the appeal of multiple buildings or the look of multiple buildings, if that is something that is important, which I think it is from an urban design standpoint. I think the only thing better than that is to require them to be multiple buildings. And I also think from a development point of view, there is a resiliency component to setting a maximum footprint to prevent overly large development, right? It takes numerous years for a single person or a company to purchase many lots. And the impact when that development happens is very large, right? And that as that conversation went on for a very long time. And if the market turns, then those few players that are at the table go away and everything stops.
I think that's pretty
And
much
that's
what's happening now.
right now. I
Yeah.
think if we lower the barrier to entry by allowing smaller development, then we create a system that's much more resilient to shocks like this, where
Okay.
smaller developments can happen and you can get financing. They can be constructed. And then again, the impact, it's not all at once, right? We expect to see change over time, of course, but it will happen over time. It won't be, I took 5 years to purchase all these properties through an LLC, and I'm gonna tear them all down at once. It's gonna be here and there, over time.
What happens if a developer does assemble a bunch of lots?
Then they
What-
have to
what-
go
what-
through the special permit process at
So-
30,000 above 30,000 square feet, the special permit process. is
Okay,
triggered.
so that's where it would
Multiple
kick in at
Yeah.
30,000 square.
Yeah, and they could still have multiple buildings on that lot. It's not that they could just have one
Correct.
Okay.
building with that footprint. But yeah, I think what Zach's saying is rather than, we go through a lot of effort with a lot of these projects to make it look and feel like they're individual buildings.
Yeah.
So why not just require they actually be individual buildings, and you can subdivide a lot and do smaller lots with individual buildings. You could do one lot with multiple buildings. I think the question is whether there should be some flexibility for there to be a special permit to deviate somewhat from that. I think if there was going to be a special permit option, it seems like footprint is where we're really focusing, less so than height.
Right.
That there be a maximum, that there be an upper limit and not just an open-ended as big as you want, because that's sort of defeating a lot of the things that we're trying to do through this.
So we can think about the Santander project, right? The footprint for that building is 17,000 square feet, so it's 2,000 square feet over this limit. By most accounts, a beautiful project that fits really well within its context. I don't know how big the lot is. It's 20,000, 25,000 square feet,
It's like,
something like
I
that.
think it's under 3/4 of an acre.
Yeah, it looks it. So, but yeah, I mean, just as an example, why wouldn't we want to allow a building to go further back into the lot in that particular case? But I think there's other cases. It only has so much street frontage.
Well, it may also, and maybe the special permit gets tied to, because that one's a little bit unique, right? They're preserving the bank.
Yes.
So you probably could have on a blank slate, made that footprint smaller, and you make up that space, by being able to have the building at the full height across the
Right.
lot. Because they're preserving that bank, they're losing, and they set the building back, which I think was a good design move.
Okay.
And what
not a
we want
perfect
them-
Example.
What we want them to do, but no, maybe that is a good example for where we might want to allow flexibility. If you do have some sort of special circumstance, right?
Yeah.
You're preserving a lower scale building on site, or there is something
Or some
unique.
some historic.
Right, that maybe that's a good rationale for allowing that deviation. So it's like not to the bar of a variance of, having some sort of unique physical hardship, but having some special circumstance to justify it.
So would that be by special permit?
Yeah.
That would be, and so I think that would be a good addition.
Are
I'm
you,
done. Yeah,
okay, thank you. Counselor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I am in a favor of eliminating the special permit option. As has been mentioned, by our staff here, it's sort of the special permit is a symptom of our zoning problem. And we want to have a zoning that's consistent and predictable. I would be in favor of some height or footprint increases based on affordability. I think that's very important to me. And yeah, I don't want to encourage a lot of rezoning requests, and I like the way the discussion is going also around smaller buildings, smaller to encourage or an array of different developers as well. You know, allow them a foot in the market. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Baker. You're muted, Counselor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the point that was being made earlier that I have some sympathy with, which is to ask what is being received in return for the special permit. And if there's some benefit to the site or the community, I would be receptive to that. But I'm also, I think, Ms. Kara, if I heard you correctly, you were thinking about something in terms of footprint rather than height, as I heard you. Is that correct? And I'm sympathetic to that idea. I think the idea of having a lower scale will make this proposal more acceptable to the community in general. And if that's consistent with the intent of meeting the needs of housing opportunity, I would support that. So I would have a rare special permit if you're going higher. I think that's my particular point of view.
Okay. I'm going to move to the rest of the counselors. Counselor Downs has her hand up.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I really like the way this conversation is going, and I liked Mr. Lamel's suggestion of focusing on the smaller, keeping the lots and the footprint small, so that you don't have these very large agglomerations of property and lots of, one big development that we try to make look like it's multiple developments. Instead, we actually just have multiple small buildings, and I like the resiliency of that. Someone that sits on land use, I'm frankly sick of all of these very large projects done by a very small number of deep-pocketed players. I'd really much rather see smaller developers doing something more unique and more sensitive to our village centers. So I would support that. And I like the way it's going. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands up, again, it seemed like a clear expression of direction. I don't think we need to take a straw vote. Do you think that would be helpful in any way? No. Okay, we got it all down, and Jacqueline's recording it religiously as we move through all of this. Right, Jacqueline? Oh, yes. Okay. Poor Jacqueline. Okay. The next item is, you didn't say that though. You can't put it in the report if you didn't say it. Sorry. Stickler for the rules.
This third item relates to the maps. And if you go to the next slide, Jacqueline.
So can I ask a quick question on the process? So if you go through this document, number 6, are we going to discuss that? Which is village center zoning proposal, apply consistent policy to zoning and city owned parcels.
So that is where we are.
Oh, that it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Does everyone know?
Set me up. So in the first version, and this is somewhat a kind of cause or derived from our current zoning, is there is not a consistent way that public city-owned parcels are zoned. There's something that is on public use, there are some things that are zoned business, and we'll see an example of that in a second. I think we want to make sure that coming from the committee, we are applying consistent policy to these overlay districts when it comes to city-owned parcels. And the recommendation here is to move forward where if there is a city-owned parcel that has a municipal building on it, or a park or something like that, it is zoned public use and it should be zoned public use within the village center overlay that we're talking about. If there is a publicly owned parking lot, service parking lot, the recommendation would be to zone it into the appropriate village center district. Regardless, any city-owned property has to go through a disposition process, but that's the recommendation here. If you can just go to the next slide, Jacqueline, you can see in Newton Center, this is a map of the current zoning. You have the Pleasant Street and Pelham Street lots, which are public. You have the Newton Green, which is public. You have the Newton Center Triangle, which is zoned Business 1. And so the thinking here would be that the parking lots, Pleasant Street, Pelham, and the Newton Center Triangle would be zoned into the appropriate village center overlay district versus the former library building.
1294 Center Street.
94
is
Center
public,
Street.
And then the Cypress Street lot is Business 1.
Right. Would remain, that would remain public use, but again, the parking lots would all become part of the zone of the village center district that would appropriately apply.
And this is an opportunity to clean this up a bit, since it is a little inconsistent today. And this is coming from some of the conversations we had as we presented the first maps. We heard from some members of the council, some members of the public, that it may make sense to pull the surface parking lots into the zoning just to signal what could be possible there. Would still need to go, as Jack said, through the disposition process, the reuse committee, all of that. So it wouldn't ever truly be anything by right there. But we're just sort of looking to get a temperature read of the committee on this idea.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't we start with Councilor Leary?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that makes sense, your proposal. And I guess we're looking at opportunities that the parking lots might have for housing. I've often thought Richardson Street lot in Newton Corner could be another opportunity for housing there. And of course, cognizant of, we still have some parking needs. And what I like about Austin Street is we actually kept our needs and we're still able to build affordable housing. So keeping the lots, I don't want any lots that they either have to have a solar array over them or a building, in my mind. So that's my thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor, President Albright. Yeah.
I like what Councilor Leary just said. I think they should be village center overlay districts. And and I agree, it's not taking away the parking, it's a combination to work. Would that work in an overlay district where there's parking and a building?
Yeah, because they would, I guess, because that would be municipal parking. So it would be separate from the buildings parking, which is the way Austin Street is, right? So it's still municipal parking and then there's the parking for the development. And like we said, all of these will need to go through the reuse process.
Right.
And many of them are over the special permit threshold as well. So there's plenty of opportunities to instill these sorts of conditions.
Okay. So you wouldn't have to say anything about the municipal parking?
No, when we get to the nitty gritty of like the parking table, we would just need to make sure municipal parking is allowed.
Okay, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm gonna jump to Councilor Baker. Don't want you always to be last, but you are muted.
Still muted? There we are. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the being included in the cycle a little earlier. I guess my question to the planning department actually is whether this is a signal that you want to send as a uniform signal. I understand that the process, that what you're recommending is a uniform way of approaching what we do, saying building is distinct from a parking lot. But I think that part of the value of having a plan here is to say there may be places where you want to retain the parking. I know that may not be what the common consensus in the room is at the moment, but I think there are places where the parking may be an important asset, and I wouldn't want to necessarily send a signal that it's a development opportunity for all those parcels. Colleagues may differ, but again, I think part of the value of a plan is to think, where do we need it and where it's going to be appropriate to deal with the potential needs for people to use the facilities, and also for those places where there may not be enough parking provided by the development itself.
Do you want to speak to that? Or?
Well, I would say that there's nothing to preclude a development. I think the signal could lead to potentially more parking on a site with a development. I mean, that is a possible outcome. So I think we're signaling that there could be development, but and I think as councilors already spoke, say that doesn't mean that, and the Austin Street is a good example, that municipal parking that wouldn't be maintained or potentially even expanded upon.
Well, let me ask you, the image I'm seeing looks like Newton Center. Am I right? My screen is small. But it looks like the Newton Center parking lot is divided into the public, which is the green space, and BU1, which is the current. But as I understand it, this would now become a VC, a red zone. Is that correct?
Just the BU1 portion. We're not proposing rezoning any park space.
No, I understand that part, but I guess I'm getting at that implies at least a planning judgment that this is appropriate for development as opposed to maintaining it as a parking area. And Councilor Danberg is a veteran of the many studies of Newton Center, and I thought that virtually all of them argued that they needed that parking lot in the center in order for the businesses to do what they needed to do. But I may be incorrect. But I guess that the point I'm trying to get at is I'm not sure a uniform structure makes sense in individual context. I understand that the idea for it makes it look simpler on paper, but is it a wise policy? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Director Heath?
Yeah, so I guess I'm back to a couple things. One, the Austin Street example, I think we should look at that. I'll talk to that in a second. And I'm looking at the same thing you are, Councilor Baker, and it's already zoned BU1. So there's already a zoning district assigned to that parking area that may have been done in error at some point, and it's not consistent across the board. But I do think it's important to identify what you want to see on a municipal parking lot, so you don't have a blank slate, as it were. If you decided, as Councilor Leary mentioned, there's a parking lot that could potentially provide both the current amount of parking or more and housing as well. It would be great for, I think, the reuse committee to have some guidance as to where they could go with it. Otherwise,
I wouldn't disagree with that. I just think that that's a judgment that may not be made by category change by itself. I think it may be site specific. So that's my comment anyway, but I appreciate what the director said.
Thanks so much. I'm going to keep going through the committee and starting on this side of the table, Councilor Danberg.
Okay, good, because now I can make a comment on Councilor Baker's comment. And yes, I am a veteran of all the parking studies in Newton Center. I've been, I think, involved with at least a half a dozen of them. And one of the things that I will say is that public parking in Newton Center enables the restaurants in Newton Center to be successful. Because the restaurants, the time when they are always full, and if you go into Newton Center in the evenings, almost no matter what time of the year, the parking lots are full, and all those people are eating in the restaurants. And I think that in order for us to make sure that we not only make housing successful, but that we make business successful also, we need to retain public parking in places like Newton Center. That being said, I think that the Austin Street example is a perfect example of how that can be done. There's no reason why we can't build over all of our parking lots, in the case of the center triangle, I would not build over the entire lot. I would build over a piece of it, on what I call the fat half of the triangle, and leave the center half so that there is both visual space, but so that it makes you feel like you are in fact in a square, and people have a place where they can go out and be on lawn or patio block and eat. So I would say also that people are willing to, well, at least me and my husband and friends that we eat with in Newton Center, are willing to walk more in the day than we are in the evening. I don't want to have to walk 2 or 3 blocks in the dark to get to a parking spot. So therefore, I would retain the ability to have first floor municipal parking where we've got it.
So, but just to make a point on this, you've said it before, but this would go through the reuse process. So decisions about exactly how much parking and is needed for whatever gets developed, as well as the municipal parking and configuration, all could be worked out during that process.
Correct.
And so as far as applying consistent policy to zoning owned parcels, yes, I'm in favor. I like what you've done, what the planning department has done.
Okay, great. Councilor Ryan?
Yeah, I'd like to see a parking lot as part of the overlay and, do a green parcel with council area. I like the building on the lot with the, solar panels on top of the building.
There you go.
I think.
I won't argue that.
All right, good.
And if we do sell these to developers, like we did Austin Street, I want to get a market value for this. I want to get what the market would if we didn't own it. So, and I agree with Councilor Danberg on the public parking, but we've already proved we can do that with Austin Street once again. I agree that, because I'm in Newton Center all the time, and you're right, at night, everything's full of triangle and everything. And I would, I would build on the parking space there, but I would also build on Cypress Street. And I think, I guess that my point is, I just never saw a parking lot, a single, surface parking lot that shouldn't be built on. I mean, it's just a waste of space. It's a heat source. So much more can be done there. And I definitely say the Village Green, Newton Center Green, which is a great open space there, which we use all through the summer for bands and political things. And I just think, and the Pelham Street lots too. I just think there's so much there, and there's so much across the city. I mean, in West Newton, in other areas, it's just there. So I think going along with the consensus, this is what I want to see. Thank you.
Okay, say yes for Councilor Ryan. Councilor Wright, and then Brinsman.
So, I agree, we should, rezone all the parking lots into the overlay district. But I don't want to see, what happened on Austin Street. I would like, instead of giving it, to a developer, I would and with a 99-year lease and renewable 99-year lease, I would like the city to remain in control of it and build 100% affordable housing there. And we control that property, and not giving it to someone else. I think that would be a much better use of the lot. I have some questions on some of the other public buildings, like, in the other village centers, the Auburndale Library, the Woburn Library and Newton Corner Library and the West Newton, you know, the annex and the police station. How are they gonna be zoned? Are those public? And the same with, like, schools that are in there? Okay. And then the churches, how are they gonna be?
So the churches are privately owned, so those would not be public use zone. They vary, for the first iteration of the maps. What we talked about last time with the adaptive reuse, we think could be really useful for the churches, that it gives some options for that space to be reused if necessary. I think in many cases, they'll stay as they are, as they have been for many years. They're currently zoned, various, you know, zoning districts, business zones, et cetera, in our zoning, and we haven't seen much change. So it's mostly about allowing some flexibility in the inside with the uses.
And I'm fine with that too. So basically, yeah, putting the parking lots onto the zoning, and then all the other public buildings would be separate.
Yep, and parks.
Great, okay, thank you. And Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is good because it gives us a chance to talk about the merits of parking, which we haven't really had. I'm fine with the proposal.
Okay. It's a yes for you, and it's a yes for me. So that takes care of the committee. And Councilor Baker on the same subject? Do you still want to speak?
No, I'm done. I'm sorry, I pulled the hand down.
Okay. Then we have a couple folks, a couple other councilors, Councilor Laredo and then Molly.
So as chair of the Real Property Reuse Committee, I don't personally feel like I need any guidance as to a particular zone if we're going to rezone public space. If we're going to reuse public space, it's going to almost invariably or most likely involve a zone change anyways as part of a special permit. So, you know, I mean, I don't think we need to do this, bottom line. I think we should label every parcel we own as public, and if there's a plan to reuse it, whether it's the area in Cypress Street, which does have a building on it, but I could see a reuse of the building, which might involve a considerable reuse of the parking lot. You're going to have a rezoning of it. And is there any other map you have besides Newton Center where you're looking to apply this? Because it seems to me that is this just directed at one parcel, or is it directed all over the city?
It's directed to the areas within the Village Center overlay district boundaries.
Is this the only one?
No, so we're just showing this as an example of how the existing zoning is set up, that it's.
Could you show us another example?
You can look at our zoning maps online, because this is showing our existing zoning just to show that it's a mix of public and business zones today. What we're proposing is to differentiate between the buildings and the surface parking lots.
So where BU1 is currently on Cypress and Brayland, would you make that a public, or would you keep that B1?
We're not keeping anything BU1 in the proposed zoning. This is just showing.
I'm sorry, would you change to VC3?
So we would propose one of the Village Center zones for the surface
But
park.
even though there's a building on the parcel?
The building on the city-owned parcel?
No,
There's two parcels there, I think.
Cypress Street lot, and then there's 1294, which is its own separate lot.
So are you talking about keeping the lot as public and the building and its parking the building and its parking is public and the rest of it is VC 2 or 3?
That's correct. Let me see if I can. So the lot that the library was on, since there's a building there, that remains public. The Cypress Street lot where there is no building whatsoever, that would be zoned. I think it's VC.
I think the building though has parking associated with it that's not in the parking lot. Am I missing something?
No, you're not. So that parcel has a building and some parking in the back that goes with the lot.
Is that in the green?
So 1294 Center is in green. The Cypress Street lot is just surface parking. The building you're seeing in the red BU1, that square building, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm just trying to understand what you've drawn here. So what you're saying is the lot that is abut Center Street includes the building and all of the parking on 1294?
Correct.
Council Lorado, this is the existing zoning map.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
So really, all you're talking about changing here would be, you'd be talking about changing what's the public lots on Pleasant and Pelham Street as well?
Yes.
Correct.
And the lot the triangular lot, which is B1. And I guess I'd like to know what other areas in the city, because you seem to be very heavily concentrated in Newton Center.
This is just a visual. So if you go back and look at our village center overlay district maps, it would be any publicly owned land in those areas.
I guess bottom line for me is, if we are going to dispose of publicly owned land, we don't need to pre-zone it right now. We're going to have a proposal come in. We're going to decide whether or not we want to rezone first of all, whether we want to dispose of the parcel in the first place. And if we do, we're undoubtedly going to have a developer who's going to want a certain zone there, whether it's V1, V2, or V3.
I think the idea is twofold: to be consistent with our new zoning, which is an overlay, to yes, illustrated intention, a possibility, and also then we have the MBTA communities law to meet.
We don't get credit unless we're in the process.
Why would this count for MBTA communities law if it's public property, which we can't build on without a developer there?
Good staff answer.
You are correct. It would not count.
Okay, let's be clear about that. Thank you. Look, I don't feel particularly strongly about it, but I don't think this is a particularly fruitful effort. And I'd like to see the city just keep its options open. And again, it has nothing to do with MBTA communities. But I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Okay, Council Maliki.
Thank you. Well, Councilor Laredo just said a lot of what I wanted to say. I see no reason to signal that we're encouraging developers to come develop our parking lots. I think anything that's a public asset now should be retain its public use zoning until somebody comes in with a proposal that would make it worth our while to give up that parking by, as somebody suggested, if they could, retain the parking and do what they want to do, or even add parking, that would be a reason to rethink. But just to take West Newton as an example, I think you probably all remember the recent discussion about the Santander project, when I think there was pretty much unanimous agreement that West Newton needed more parking, and where are we going to have it and how are we going to do it? So the idea that we would rezone for example, Cherry Street lot and call it VC whatever instead of public use seems very inconsistent with that concern. If somebody has an idea to retain the parking around the parking, let them come in with it and go through the rezoning process. And for another example, Newton Center here, I think the reason that NewCal, I hate to call it that, but the new senior center is not going to be on the Newton Center triangle is because the businesses said we can't give up that parking. So that parking is important to keep. And just one other thought, you might say it's only 1 or 2 days a year, but that's it seems like the ideal location for Harvest Fair in October. It's all over that triangular parking lot. I guess you could move it to, one of the high school parking lots or something like that, but you wouldn't have that same sense of, the village businesses around it benefiting and that kind of sense of community that you get in having it in that type of location. So I would strongly just, leave public property as zone public use, make it consistent by having it all zone public use instead of this sort of artificial distinction that some things are useful and some things are not.
So just for the record, I think the Cherry Street lot is zone business 1 today. So you know, a lot of these, I think the options are we rezone these that are already zoned business to public use, or we rezone them to a village center district.
I'd say rezone it to public use. That's what's being used as. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Council Bowman. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you, Director Heath?
I don't want to belabor this. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. Council Bowman, and we do want to move on. We're getting late.
Okay, I'll be quick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I would just say that there is no public lot here that in the city that I don't think we should consider options to build over, but clearly in this conversation, and I'm all for consistency. You have Cherry Street and Newton Center that are both clearly BU1, and that hasn't been enough to encourage people to build on it. So I don't think it's the rezoning of this to a village center zone that's going to make the difference as to whether or not it actually gets built on. But I think the opportunity now in doing this is, you know, while you're busy looking at the maps and talking about what's the appropriate placement for VC1 and VC2 and VC3, is to be having those conversations about if something were to be built on these properties, making them fit in with your thought about how these village centers lay out. So I think you're missing an opportunity. It's not the rezoning of them to be buildable, but it's the opportunity to rezone them and have them fit in with the master plan of the zoning in case they are built on, that you would lose by not rezoning them to be what you would want them to be if they were built on, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. All set? I think you've heard from the committee and some councilors on this item. If we're trying to wrap this up at 10 o'clock, we could introduce the metrics for VC1. I'm going to suggest, though, that we not go around the room in the same way, you know, with VC1. The metrics are quite, if people want to have something to say about them, but I think we also need to be looking at them with respect to how it lays out on the maps, and we're not going to be able to do that tonight.
So will we get to go through maybe next time, or go back to these other items? Where I have questions and concerns and comments?
We have 2 more meetings this month, and then there's April. I really would like to spend some time talking about the timeline and our expectations going forward. You know, at this point, we're trying to have a version 2 available to us, also to critique starting in April. But we'd like to make sure that as much of our understanding and consensus goes into that version as possible. And so, you know, and we have a lot on the table. So how about an overview of the VC1 metrics? And folks who want to speak to that tonight, in broad terms, understanding that really does need to be looked at with the maps. You know, if you're changing the metrics this dramatically, where are we thinking that VC1 now belongs? So Zach, are you doing this?
Yeah, so the next slide. So I think the short piece here is we've had a lot of input from the committee, other counselors, from the public and community, and that the VC1 district, as it was originally proposed, allowed for the intent was to allow for multifamily development in line with the kind of residential areas that are surrounding our village centers, right? And the key thing here is we need small and mid-scale multifamily development to support the vibrancy of the village centers. But those metrics were a little bit off. And the recommendation here is to take what was the building footprint of 4,000 square feet max, reduce it to 1,500 square feet max. to set a unit of minimum and maximum. So within that 1,500 square foot footprint, across 2.5 stories for a pitched roof, 2 stories for a flat roof in Village Center 1. 3 units minimum, 4 units max, to really take those setbacks and make sure that again, that these buildings are set forward. We still want them to create a sense of place and a certain scale, but aligning those setbacks as well with some of the multi-resident zones that we already have. The parking requirements we've already touched upon at this point. And then when it comes to open space and multiple buildings on a lot, I think there's a question here of whether or not open space is required. We're really thinking that the footprint, the setbacks and the parking requirements really will make sure that we get appropriate open space. And possibly multiple buildings on a lot could require a special permit. These standards here are for new construction. I know this was talked about in the memo, but really looking at an opportunity for new construction that allows for multifamily development, that those units are necessary, again, not only to support the vibrancy of the Village Center, but also for MBTA communities. But if we go to the next slide, create a real incentive for the conversion of existing buildings above and beyond. So whereas new construction would max out at 4 units, you could convert an existing building up to 6 units. The setbacks are the same as new construction. The parking requirement would go to 0. So again, really making sure that we're creating the incentives in place to convert an existing building. And then when it comes to expanding your footprint, there would be an additional 400 square feet allowed. It can go to the rear or the side of the lot. We don't really want to see this on the front elevation. So again, the incentive to convert existing buildings through additional units and reduce parking requirements. Go to the next slide. I just want to show that these exist all over our village centers already in various sizes and shapes, you know, at varying unit size. These are all 4 units. You can see the footprints range between 1,100 and 2,200 square feet. The lot sizes are varied, but for the most part tend to be pretty small. If you go to the next slide, again, Newtonville, Auburndale, Newton Highlands, 4, 5, 6 units. They all exist 2.5 stories. You go to the next slide, and these are some examples of conversions that have happened over the years, again, throughout the city. Again, varying lot sizes, but again, they can be very small as well. Do I have another slide? Just more examples here. Again, really all over the city, adjacent to transit, and really creating policy that would allow for these things to happen where they really can't today. And then that's for that conversation.
If you go back, yeah. Thank you. I just have to say that I noticed right away that all the footprints, most of the footprints, not are larger. Some are much larger than 1,500 footprint. And so can you speak to that for a moment? And then I see Council Ryan and Danberg.
Well, I think most footprints are somewhat in line. So there's one on this. Go back to the other ones.
2 of those are about.
Yeah, the convergence is confusing. So go back to them.
Okay, so 1,700 square feet.
17, 16.
So
11.
16, 22.
It only comes to 1,900 as and the max that you could have, but some of those are fine examples of.
No, the 400 is in addition to the existing footprint. So the existing footprint could be over 1,500 square
Right,
feet.
there's for converting an existing building.
Okay,
There's
that takes
plus,
care of
then
that.
you
Yeah.
get a bonus. And
So how did you come up with, let's ask it this way, how did you come up with 1,500? Because for example, looking on the far left, that was not a conversion.
No,
No, these were built that way.
and part of it is to really try to incentivize the conversion, right? So we wanted to set the new construction to be fairly low, so that when we are getting new construction, it's in a pretty tight footprint. So it's more along the lines of West Street here than Chestnut Street, though Chestnut Street is just 2 stories, flat roof. They could do, under our proposal, you could do a pitched roof and go to 2.5 stories, because so you could make up some of that space there. But it's really to make it so that the converting the existing is more attractive in most cases. So we know it's not that simple or inexpensive to convert an existing home into multiple units. So we wanted to tip the scales as much as we could towards making that an attractive option, and then ensure that when we are getting new construction, it is very modest in scale.
And smaller units, and small,
Yeah.
ranging between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet plus minus.
Because you get about a 4,000 square foot building with a 1,500 square foot footprint.
Okay, I have another question, but I'm gonna just go to Council Ryan and then Danberg and then Wright.
So we're commenting on this now?
Well, they raised their hands.
I hear you.
so I want-
We're not getting in order.
Yeah.
10 minutes, split it up. Mine's quick. I just, on the conversions, I saw one went to 6 units. Where's the parking? Because we haven't talked to them.
Can we just put questions on the table and maybe go through, because we're like sort of at the end of the night, we're gonna pick this up at our next meeting.
And I need a lot more to want to go the extra 400. Because, what's the rear, what's the side, and what says you can't change the rear and the side to the rear, and you know where I'm coming from. on
Yeah,
that.
the corner lots. And the extra 400 is to allow for really egress circulation. So one of the issues when you're converting is you needing additional egress, maybe you need to add an elevator. So allowing for that to happen outside the existing footprint.
Am I gonna get an answer on the parking, on the conversion?
So we're proposing 0. So you can provide some, but we're proposing 0.
What happened in the cases you were showing us? There was. one-
Oh, in these cases,
Yeah.
I see.
They do, I think that most of them do have parking. I mean, if you go a couple slides. The one on the left is.
This one here, yeah.
Man, that's a 60,000 square foot lot. They have plenty of parking. I think a lot of these sites are big enough that they do provide. But I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look at it.
Right, I've seen a couple where they're just these crappy
Sure.
lot spaces, but I was just wondering how they did that. One of the, why, well, I won't call it, one of the, things that's said to me from, BC1, people living in BC1 and residential is if you're converting, and I don't really agree with this, but when you're converting homes to, let's say a 2-family, one on each side, and then you have to put in another driveway and another curb cut. I hear, our neighborhood can't handle.
In the code, we've written that only one curb cut is allowed. For
And
the
that,
area.
was that also by right?
By right.
Because right now, the way it is, if you go for a special permit, we can say that, let's say a circular driveway, that, we can say, well, we only want you to have one curb cut, but by right, you can put a circular driveway in with 2 curb cuts.
That's because we don't have it in the code today.
All right, I'm just saying.
Yeah, so that's codifying
that
it
we should-
here.
That will, recognize.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Okay, and Council Wright.
I have a few questions. So on here, you have the front setback is 10 feet, but in everything, in all the zoning, it ranges from 15 feet to 25 feet. So you're pulling the houses much closer to the street, and I thought we want to have it blend in. So I think the front setbacks are not correct. I'd like to see it more what that zoning is now.
The zoning doesn't what is now doesn't reflect what is actually on the ground.
Yeah.
So just because the front setback is 25 feet required, doesn't mean.
So maybe, I mean, it should be what it is, or the average of the two houses on either side, you know? And then you also reduce the side setback to 7.5 feet, and most of the zoning now is, more than 7.5 feet. And I think our biggest complaint is the houses are built too close to the other houses. So I would like to see that increase. I do like the idea of, if you're gonna build new, to only have 1,500, because that will incentivize keeping the house. I actually would, because there's a few like really huge houses, is, you're saying, you know, up to 6 units if you're keeping the house, but or you could do more units if it averages 1,000 or 1,200 square feet per unit, because occasionally you'll get a huge house that might be, you know, 10, 1,200 square feet. So, but in general, cap it, but unless the house is that big. A couple of questions. What about, sorry, I have to find this. So adding additional buildings on the lot, and I know in Newtonville, there's a lot of long skinny lots where they're big, so you put stuff in the back there. Are those new buildings gonna be allowed only 1,500 square feet?
So, yeah, all new construction would be capped at 1,500 square foot footprint, and one of the things we wanted to discuss was whether you should need a special permit when there's multiple buildings, and maybe it's different whether there's an existing building you get to add one, or if it's all new construction.
So one thing I'd like to add, though, is if you have more than one building on the lot, that the other buildings complement or similar to the original style. So if you have a Victorian, don't want to see the back building being a flat roof, 2-story, ultra modern. So something to complement it or very similar in style. I think in the past, you only having 15 feet between the buildings and that, and right now, when we add a second building in the back, everything's 25 feet around it for the setbacks. I'd like to see bigger setbacks.
Where's the 25 feet? Sorry.
From the side setbacks, when they're adding the additional building, I'm thinking right over by Cabot Street and the other ones, I believe it's 25 feet that they have the setbacks. Doing the side setbacks, rear setbacks for the additional building on the lot. I'll double check that for you, but I'm pretty sure that's how it is. And so because
in the zoning though.
Yeah, it is. I think it is when you're doing it. No, it's not a subdivision, but it's the other building, because again, when that's where we get a lot of complaints, when they're gonna add another building in the back, again, people are complaining because the setbacks are so close, because before they didn't have it. And then one other question I gotta find. So what about if a property is a pre-existing non-conforming, and then they're gonna have new construction, is the new construction permitted? Because I thought once you have a lot in the designation, it kind of stays with the lot.
So do you mean the 400 square foot addition?
No, if they're gonna tear down, if they tear down the building, they have to do according to the new zoning, they won't get any, nothing goes with the lot then.
You mean like non-conforming
Yeah.
setbacks or something like that?
Yeah.
That's a question we need to check with the law department on. I don't know. I don't know that it would be different than our existing zoning today, how that operates.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'll do it next time.
If you want to send those to us in advance, then we can try to be ready with responses next time.
Okay.
Just to the planning department, please. Councilor Krinsman, I'm sorry, what did you, just to the planning department, and the clerk would be fine.
I want to move hold.
I have a question before you move hold, if you can.
Okay, we'll hold your hold.
Well, I thought we were going around. I thought you were just taking hands.
We're not going around. I thought you had your hand up. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go to Counselor Baker, and really, guys, can we save a lot, if you have a lot of substantive material, can we save it till next time? Because we do really want to spend a few minutes on the calendar.
Yeah, my comment is really a question to the department. When you talked about modifying the setbacks, if I recall correctly, so that they could be narrower than the previous model, in the interest of easy, I guess the question is that because of, you'd indicated some egress issues, but the question I would have is, what is that? Is there any context specific aspect of that? I recall many years ago when we redid the expansion of non-conforming uses, one of the questions was the total setback that resulted from a particular expansion, because we were trying to protect the neighboring properties from being adversely affected. So I guess I would encourage the department to go back and look at that and give us some sense of whether that is an absolute reduction in the setback or whether the setback reduction would be context sensitive. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for putting that on the table. Counselor Downs, have something quick for us?
I'm curious about in VC1, what the thinking is on the multiple buildings on a lot. I noticed they're moving to special permit and site plan review. What's the thinking? Why are we thinking why is planning thinking of doing that?
I think it's put forward as a question for the committee. I think that moving to special permit for new construction, it is there. There are comments about the residential, these residential areas and open space and things like that. And what we would hope to see is, again, to encourage these larger lots in particular to not use multiple buildings on a lot to kind of skirt around no open space requirements. What we'd rather see, I think, is the larger lots be subdivided, and you get multiple buildings fronting the street. Again, it's important. I know there are unique conditions where there are very deep lots and things like that, but we can handle that. Versus if there's large lots that have 100, 120 feet of frontage, we'd rather see that broken down, into two buildings, which again, I think we would see, two buildings or three buildings with 4 units in each of them.
So you want multiple buildings where you've got a lot of frontage, but you don't want multiple buildings on deep lots? Is that the thought?
It might need more consideration, right? I think multiple buildings that confront the street should move forward. And then if you're going to put multiple buildings similar to, I think, where you're seeing, not similar, because I definitely don't want to compare it. So I'll just stop talking about that then.
I think the multiple buildings, so for VC1, we're really trying to make the conversion a really attractive option. And so we want to make sure we're sort of dialing down the new construction for that reason. And we want to make sure the new construction is more consistent with the existing fabric. When you get to multiple buildings, that's when maybe it should have some more discretion.
So how about we use this as a segue into our calendar, because we clearly have to continue this conversation about VC1 at our next meeting, which is Monday, March 27th. Monday, March 27th, though, we are beginning with 2 other items. We want an update on the 10 communities program and a status report on, where we stand with respect to those rules. What we need to do in order to, assuming we meet the affordability requirements, what we need to do in order to comply and participate in that program. And we're going to have an ordinance draft. There is an ordinance drafted on requiring reporting for embodied carbon. it's been a year since we talked to that group and they've actually been working through that whole year. So we have those two items. They're relatively short with the embodied carbon. If we like the ordinance, which we'll have in our hands, we could set a public hearing for it for sometime in May or June. And then the rest of our meeting will be devoted to Village Center, so like half the meeting, not the usual 3 hours. And I understand that UTL will be joining us on the 27th, and then they will have some case studies to show us of the VC1, which seems like it would be very important for our understanding when we start talking about the different lots that are within the half mile of public transit and how they might be handled.
And
That's my comment, but
I think we're also gonna be presenting on the affordable housing incentive, and we're gonna have the consultants we're working with from Landwise here as well. So I think we'll probably start with that to get that proposal out there and have an opportunity to ask questions while we have the consultants on the call.
so why don't we talk some more about how to time that
Yep.
meeting, because and maybe we want to start earlier so we're not so tired. At the other end, if people can start, let's say 6:30. If, I think our sustainability team could.
Yeah.
What's that?
I can go another 2 hours, no problem.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could too, but there are a lot of people have to get up early and go to work the next day. So, trying to, like, do the right thing for everybody. And then on the 27th, we're being joined by UTL. 29th, I'm sorry, we're being joined by UTL again. And much of that, we can continue this conversation, but much of that meeting is going to be, and maybe start with the focus on MBTA communities and what are all the factors that have to be input into the compliance model that we may not quite understand the balance of yet. So we'll be talking about that. We have a motion to hold from Councilor Krinsman. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other really important comments that anybody feels they must say before the end of the meeting? I don't see any hands, so. Okay, Councilor Danber.
Just one thing, there are a few villages that I'm looking at right now where there are some lots in DC1 that are large enough so that I think that a limit of an additional 400 square feet would not allow us to do all of what we would like to do, which is to add some additional units. So I think we need to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Well, as long as we're just adding comments for next time, I'll have one. I sense some concern about the limitation on the footprint. I get your reasoning. I would like to understand the factors that the factors that contributed to your decision that 1,500 square feet is the right number. Or maybe because of all the unusual size lots and the deep lots and so forth, as we consider where VC1 should go, mean that there should be a special permit option. So we're not excluding opportunity in those areas.
I make a comment?
Sure.
My comment is I want to thank Mr. Lamel for showing all those pictures. Because I have a very hard time picturing what a 1,500 square foot building, the footprint looks like. So that really helped a lot.
Thank you. And thank you all for all of your work. It's
Are we starting at 6:30 on the 27th?
and is there anyone who cannot begin at 6:30 on the 27th of March?
I require pizza. We're going to start at 6:30.
We can do that.
Who can supply pizza? I can bring one.
I could do 6:30.
Yeah, okay, anybody? Yeah. All right, good. So,
How about the 29th? What's that? That's
it's not etched in stone. 29th, want to try for 6:30 as well? See if we can just. Because it would be nice to have a hard stop at least, and if not sooner. There's a lot of-
I might have a problem on the 29th on Wednesday, but go ahead.
We have trouble attending or,
No, just 6:30. I'll be there at 7, but I just
okay, all right. So now we still have a motion from Counselor Krinsman to hold the item. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining? Thank you very much and have a good night. And be careful out there tomorrow. It's gonna be a